Welcome to the Oregon Early Learning Council meeting for June 29th, 2020. I want to thank council members for being on this call, as well as partners who are on the phone and public members who are joining us. And our wonderful staff and consultants helping make this meeting happen. Remy, will you go ahead and call the roll, please?
Okay, do we have Angie Blackwell?
Yes, present.
Katie Brooks?
I'm here.
Peter Buckley?
I'm here.
And Kubish?
She's here. I can see her.
Here. Oh, there she is. George Mendoza?
I'm here. I'm listening.
Oh, excellent.
Hi, George.
Peg Miller? Going to write her down as excused for right now. Eva Ripito? I will mark her as excused for the moment. Cleathorne Ladd?
Here.
Excellent. Sue Miller, chair.
Here.
And then some directors, Pat Allen, the director of Oregon Health Authority.
Here.
Let's see, we've got Colt Gill, director of the Oregon Department of Education, or stand-in.
I'm here, thanks.
Oh, excellent. Oh, I see you. Margaret Salazar, the director of Oregon Housing and Community Services.
I'm here. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And then Miriam Calderon, Early Learning Systems Director of the Oregon Early Learning Division.
Present.
Thank you. And I think that's it.
All right. Thanks, Remy. And thanks for all your help in setting this meeting up as well. All right, Council, you may remember we last met about 2 months ago. It may seem like 2 years or so, but it was actually just 60 days ago. And obviously a lot has changed. COVID continues to be a serious problem and challenge for our state. Its impacts seem to be intensifying because of the length of time that we're being socially distancing and isolating. So that is intensifying. And then also we obviously now have racial justice as a primary focus of the country, the state, and certainly the work that we need to do in early learning. And I think the racial justice issue has become predominant partly because of the impact of COVID. And we're seeing how disproportionately it's affecting people of color and people living in poverty. And then, of course, the horrific deaths of Black people across this country at the hands of police. So because of this changed environment in which we are now living, I asked Kali if she would make some opening comments for us today, knowing that Kali is one of the primary leaders in the Black community and generally in the community in Portland and also respected throughout the state. So Kali, thank you for being willing to sort of lead us off in a conversation around anti-racism and early childhood.
Thanks, Chair Miller. I have some background noise, so please excuse the children's voices that you may hear. So as I was thinking about this, I really felt like we are in a place of privilege to be able to impact the lives of young children. So I did write some remarks and I'll read them, but I just hope everybody holds in this space how fortunate we are to be able to have influence on these young ones who I think will shape our future. We are the lucky ones. We have the privilege of impacting the lives of children from the very moment they are conceived. We literally get to help shape whether these precious little ones are racist or anti-racist through the care we provide, the words we use, and the ways we expose them to this world. We get to cultivate their curiosity and enhance their empathy through the care we provide and the words we use. And we help them see the rich tapestry of our diverse communities here in Oregon, or not. The choice is up to us. So much of our future and our society lies in the decisions that we get to make, and what all of the people in the early learning space get to make every day for the little ones in their care. And so we sit here carrying the weight and the privilege of this huge responsibility in this moment in time that is both unprecedented and in ways unimaginable. I heard this likened to 1968 and 1918 all at once. The COVID pandemic has decimated communities across the state, and this holds true while embedded in the reality that the pandemic of racism has persisted much longer. And this pandemic has contributed to massive inequality, massive wealth inequity, making COVID-19 even more catastrophic to communities of color. And sadly and tragically, the racial pandemic is far from over. Of all the federal stimulus checks that went out, only 15% went to minority-owned businesses. So we're seeing it play out even in our present day. And in early learning, we know that 1 in 4 Black women are still dying in childbirth. And that's despite economic privilege. And many believe this is because of the added stress that racism puts in their bodies. There are many indicators that say we have not arrived and we are on a journey. And that is why our work today and our work every day is very important. Some of us choose to protest. Some of us choose to talk to our children. All of us on this council, I believe, should choose to be actively anti-racist. Ibram Kendi, in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which I understand is sold out and it's on back order, but he reminds us that racism is not neutral. You are either racist or you're anti-racist. Allowing racism to exist is a passive racist. Confronting racism is anti-racist. But what I like about what he says is that racism is a verb. It is not a pejorative. It is something we all can choose to lean into or not, no matter who we are or where we come from. And at the heart of it, anti-racist is simply about being a better human to other humans, specifically those who have been denied their humanity for far too long. And we saw it with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, but we've also seen it at our borders. We have seen it throughout history for many populations, concentration camps for the Japanese and API community in this state. We can look over and over again and see how the dehumanization of people has rendered them invisible and has traumatized and terrorized them. And we have a choice to make to create a different future. And so, council members, I think that this is our inflection point. This is when we should all be asking ourselves, what is the Oregon that we want to be, and how do we, as individuals and as a collective, provide this for our children? And when we talk about equity, are we ensuring that we are supporting the small businesses that provide childcare for our children? And I know all of you care about this, advocate for this, but we have to do more, I think. I think our conscience says that we can't allow childcare workers to make below living wage, knowing that many of them, most of them, are women and women of color, when the future of our state is literally in their hands. And when we talk about equity, we cannot merely look at access, recognizing that quality actually matters. Quality access must be our goal. And I'll give you this analogy. Access to food can include anything between McDonald's and a salad bar. And yes, it's important to have food in the belly, but we want to ensure nourishment. Can we care enough about equity to move beyond a discussion of just access and truly focus on ensuring all of our children have access to quality early childhood experiences? And depending on the skin that they're in, that looks different for different children. Do the teachers speak their language? Do they see books and read literature that reflects their culture and their values? These are things that we should be striving for no matter where childcare is being provided in the state of Oregon. And when we talk about equity, can we see that the development of the whole child is paramount? And I know all of you hold this as a value, but all of Oregon does not. Children thrive when they know that they are loved and valued, when they are seen. So suspending Black and brown boys in particular, which is still a problem when they are 4 years old, it takes away the love and value that we have upon children. We as a council have an opportunity to lead, to change that. We need to make sure that we don't see them as a threat, but as a treasure. Because, and I said before in another talk, the person that perpetuated the crime against George Floyd also was a little boy at one point in time, being raised by a world around him. We need to change the world so we have a different outcome. It is not just about supporting our Black and brown children. It's about supporting all of our children to make a better world and be anti-racist. And so I hope that we can begin to map the difficulty that we see children have as resiliency and not trauma. I hope that we can stop pathologizing our children when they have behavior issues and challenges and start honoring them and lifting them up and seeing their value and seeing their worth and being able as a council to speak to that, to our whole state. Remind them that this is our future, that from the very beginning, at 5 to 6 months old, children see difference. This does not happen when they're older. By the time they are 2 and 3, they are beginning to categorize that difference and be able, our brains categorize things by nature. That is how they function. And we assign stereotypes to different groups based on what we've seen and what has been said to us. It happens at a young age. So this idea that not talking to children about race, not introducing race, and that it doesn't matter doesn't help our children. Being able to celebrate difference, honor difference, and illuminate the value and the beauty and the humanity of every person. Colorblind is not okay. Everybody comes from a rich culture that we should be lifting up. Being nice is not enough. Being nice is not being anti-racist. Being anti-racist is nice. It is being actively disciplined to speak out against racism and act in such a way that is anti-racist. And I hope that this opportunity, that this moment and movement in time presents us is a way to change course. I think all of us have been fighting in our own ways to make a better Oregon for our young ones, but I think more has to be done. And I think there is a willingness and hopefully an openness to doing things differently that we haven't seen before. And I hope that there is an openness to seeing early childhood should not be over here, that the early learning system and the K-12 system are connected. And then when we start supporting children at their youngest ages to thrive, we can continue to carry that thread along as they get older. It's a privilege to serve with all of you in this work. It's a privilege to be engaged in conversations about anti-racism and supporting all of our young ones. I do, with all of my heart, believe that our jobs as council members and early learning division leaders are some of the most important jobs in the state of Oregon. We are shaping our future every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Yes. What a very powerful statement. And it certainly puts us right in the eye of the storm, basically, and saying we have an important leadership role to play. And you're right, this is the future of our state. Definitely. So other comments from other council members around the whole issue of anti-racism. And I love Kendi's book. I've now read it twice. It was an eye-opener for me to understand there's no middle ground between being a racist or an anti-racist. So it's a great book. Comments from any other council members on your own worlds, your own perspectives, what's happening as you see it in this?
I was just going to comment, Kali said it out so well, just so very, very well. Much appreciated. Very glad that the legislature has taken some steps. There's still a long way to go, but there was good progress last week. So it should be noted.
Yeah, good point, Peter.
Yeah, and I just thank you, Kelly, for that. I just want to say that for me, what is really important is that we are talking now about the term structural racism is now a term that people use and that they understand. I mean, 20 years ago, when some of us were starting to work in this whole area and writing words about structural racism, nobody knew what it meant. It didn't mean anything. It wasn't on people's tongues. It seemed like something that was this abstract thing. But when we're talking about the systems that reproduce inequity, when we talk about the structures that that include the history of our nation or our region, that include our sort of our cultural representations, that include everything, I think this is so important. And I think that you're right, Kali, that we have to tie it, right? This is our moment to tie it to actual decisions about the way that these institutions work and the way these systems work because we know that the systems will reproduce themselves all the time. And this is a moment of active undoing. So I want to make sure that we're talking about sort of the structural dimensions and the systemic dimensions of racism, and not just our cultural representations, not just our biases, not just and so on, but the fact that systems will reproduce these inequities unless we actively dismantle them. And I think it's really important that you're raising it at those multiple levels, because I think there's an opening that we've never seen before in this society.
Yeah, great points, Anne. I think that's the optimism that you, Kali, were suggesting as well. Other comments from any council members?
Sue, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, George. Welcome. Thanks for getting on.
Well, just in case, I'm driving between Pendleton and Boardman. Sometimes it gets choppy, so I just would say that I really appreciated the message that Khalid shared, and that I definitely feel that we need to be moving in a direction in all of the, I'll just say, public systems that we have, or public education systems specifically, with doing.
You just cut out, George. You may be between cell towers or whatever.
Up an equity stance.
Oh, you're back.
Okay, sorry. I don't know where I lost you, or I didn't. So
yeah, you were just
anyway,
talking about the public education systems.
Okay. And just in general, I think if we have a direction or policy or some kind of law that helps districts to move forward with implementing policies, or implementing equity lens, or implementing equity stances, and then going forward with professional development and having training on anti-racism, bias, and structural systems that we have in place that create, I'll say, inequity. There should be some level of policy push for organizations to get better, to grow, and to move into commitment. Right now, even if it started out as compliance and then it moved towards commitment, that would really help the future of our organizations, but also be helping our children and helping our families. I'll just stop.
Okay, thank you, George. Excellent point that having some of those standards that would be cross-sector from, yes, all of our partners is something we can talk about this afternoon for sure. Any other comments from council members? All right, I'll bet with our agency directors, we'll be hearing some of their comments related to this when we get their updates. All right, thank you all very much. Kali, thank you for that fabulous foundation, really, for all of our work today, because where this meeting is heading, and you know it from the agenda, is to say, what are our recommendations as a council that we want Alyssa Chatterjee, the governor's policy advisor, to take back to the governor, saying, these are the priorities that we believe the governor should adopt for the coming year, but also I think looking ahead to the biennium. So we can be short-term and we can be long-term in our vision. And it'll be great. And I want to apologize in advance to the agency directors that we gave you 5 to 7 minutes apiece to talk about what's going on in your agencies in the child early learning realm. I'm guessing each of you could take an hour. So council members, as we listen to our agency director partners, please listen partly with an ear to how does that feed into our later discussion about what should our priorities be. And we're going to have it from all 5 different agencies. So we'll be able to really put together a robust cross-sector agenda to hand to Alyssa for the governor. So just keep that in mind. And I'll just refer you to the handout that Remy sent us. It's the innovative responses to COVID-19 that is posted on the website, but also we each received it last week. And it gives us some idea of what our agency partners have been doing to try to take advantage of this crisis, if you want to look at it that way, and say there must be some things that are positive that can come out of this very, very difficult time. So just refer you to that document too. All right, so let's get started. And we're going to start with Pat Allen, who's head of the Oregon Health Authority. Welcome, Pat.
Thanks, Chair Miller, and it's hard to think about what to say in 5 to 7 minutes about COVID in the current moment. I think probably the biggest challenge for us as an agency is being able to figure out how to do anything other than coronavirus response as an organization. But we have been able to do that. But let me first start and really pick up on Kali's very powerful words. One of the things I've discovered about a pandemic is while there are opportunities for it to bring out the best in organizations, it also exposes some of the worst elements and some of the biggest problems and some of the biggest challenges. And health inequity is something that we as an organization were in the midst of committing ourselves to a long-term strategic goal of eliminating when coronavirus sort of cut that work short. And what it's done is in the disparate impacts of COVID on communities of color in the state, it's really exposed those health inequities as deep-seated, long built, and really structural in nature. And they're the kind of inequities that we need to be able to address in our response, but that our response won't be able to fix. Fixing those inequities and that underlying structural racism is a larger project than just how we respond to coronavirus. We have been able to do, however, some good work, I think, that will help contribute to that. One of the things that's captured in the memo that Chair Miller referred to is the expansion of enrollment in the Oregon Health Plan. We've done a couple of things basically to automatically expand the health plan in terms of turning on or off some steps that occur in the process. So for instance, every year we redetermine someone's eligibility for the health plan. We do that often automatically, but sometimes we need to interact with the member on OHP to get documentation from them. Well, we've stopped that. We're no longer requiring people to respond to us on redetermination. We're simply automatically determining them to be eligible for another period of time so that they don't go off the rolls. Similarly, there are all kinds of documentation of income sorts of things that we typically require, and these are all under federal waivers that have allowed us to do this. We've stopped asking for that documentation. So today we have about 40,000 more people on the Oregon Health Plan than we did before coronavirus because of the operation of those two things, as well as people now beginning to sign up because they've lost health coverage due to their employment. That turns out to be a much smaller impact than we expected, partly because the job losses have fallen disproportionately on people who didn't have health care to begin with. And secondly, nobody's accessing health care right now, or very, very few people are for any reason because of their concerns about interacting with healthcare facilities. And so that part of enrollment is lagging a little bit. I bring this all up because access to healthcare is itself one of those structural inequities that drives the disproportionate impact related to coronavirus. And so everything that we can do to provide more access to the system more easily helps begin to chip away at that element of inequity. We anticipate right now probably having 200,000 more enrollees on the system, which is about a 20% increase. We think that will dial back over time. And the one bright spot is courtesy of an experience that some of you may remember called Cover Oregon. We actually have a modern enrollment system for Medicaid, and so we're able to accommodate this surge of enrollments without some of the challenges that other agencies have had in terms of some big spikes in numbers and those kinds of things. The other thing I'll just touch on quickly in my brief bit of time is universal home visiting, which has been delayed but is still moving forward. We're basically 6 months behind schedule in terms of rolling that out, but we are moving forward with the pilot portions of the state that we expected to roll out. We're going to have to do some creative design work around what does home visiting look like in a time when home visiting literally isn't probably the best idea, but we think that's such a foundational piece of what we can contribute to improving health equity and early childhood outcomes that we feel like we've got to figure out come hell or high water how we're going to be able to roll that out, and we're moving forward with that. So with that, Chair Miller, I'll stop and hand the baton off.
Okay, and let me just see if there are any quick questions of Pat, because he did such a great job of staying within his time limit. Thank you, Pat. Any questions from council members or comments? Okay, thanks, Pat. Great update, and thanks for being on television all the time. All right, next we will go to Colt Gill, whom, as we know, is the Deputy Superintendent of the Department of Education. Colt, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. I think I'm going to back up and start with, I think you asked us to share a little bit about budget situations and how that may impact things going forward. So I'll start there, and then I'll revert back into some of the other programs and challenges we have. So first, I'll say, for the most part, we're awaiting a legislative session to better understand the impact of the revenue declines and what that will mean in terms of our spending on different programs, including those where we serve early learning. We do know, though, that the governor is clearly prioritizing early learning through the Early Learning Division and through our programs at ODE, the EIECSE. So I think that we will continue to fully fund those programs from the ODE side, and let the legislature at some point and governor tell us to back away from that. So that will be that effort going forward. This weekend, the governor, in some of her media opportunities, also made clear she was going to advocate for fully funding the state school fund this coming year, feeling like this is not a time when we already have a number of inequities in our school systems as well, where we want to reduce staffing in our schools, our charter schools, or ESDs. So I think that we'll continue to move forward with full funding of the state school fund. We are just today, based on that information, sending out estimates to our school districts. I think that we still do need the legislature to weigh in on a number of other issues related to high school success. It's Measure 98. Some of the other programs in the Student Success Act. Outside of, I think that we will work together to emphasize all the equity, specifically equity-based programs. So our African American Black Student Success Group, our American Indian Alaska Native Student Success, Latino, Latina, Latinx Student Success, and a few other programs that are related to that, like the tribal curriculum project. I think those will continue to receive full funding, and at least until we learn more from the legislature. And then other things we will hold back on until around August 1st, when we will learn more, hopefully from a special session. So when I looked back at the our joint plan, I think that one of the things to understand is that much of the school district funds that are received in the K-12 system are based on a per pupil funding formula that is funding students from kindergarten to 12th grade, where some districts have been using those funds to either supplement or fully create preschool programs or other kinds of programs for early learners. That they'll be more challenged to do that until they understand fully what their budget will be. So that's one of the areas where I would have some concern. I do think that professional learning at this time, which we have a few different joint ventures around the P3 space, that will be challenging for our districts. Though they need professional learning now more than ever in terms of the way that they're delivering education in different models, either in person or hybrid models or online models. But I'm a little worried about the shift in those priorities that our school districts may have and how that might impact that early learning space and that shared professional learning. While it will be needed there as well, I'm a little worried about the urgency they have in shifting into new delivery systems and how that might impact professional learning. And then I know that you all are aware of this already, but we did, for the 2020-21 school year, suspend the kindergarten assessment. And what I don't want that to do is signal a walking away from the need for that and supporting that improvements in the kindergarten assessment. This is really based on how we'll be operating school in the coming year with physical distancing and the kind of assessment that is, where the teacher and the student sit side by side, oftentimes touching the same materials to walk through, and the kinds of experiences our children will have had the last 6 months before entering kindergarten, that we just didn't feel like that was an appropriate assessment to be giving at this time. But it doesn't mean that we are walking away from that permanently. Again, we'll very happy to partner with the Early Learning Division on the continued improvement of that model that appears in the plan. I'm probably already past, Sue, my time. I'm happy to share more if helpful, but I could take questions if that's more important.
Yeah, no, you're doing great, Colt. If there are other updates you'd like to mention, that would be great.
What I would share then, I'll be quick about this, but we, going into the COVID-19 pandemic, we had developed as an agency a strategic equity plan that is probably more critical now than ever, but also challenging to get up and rolling in this environment. And so we have been pulling different tenets of that and using them in our leadership team meetings and in our efforts to develop guidance for the field. So we have developed guidance for the spring, for summer school, now for school in the fall. And with each one of those, we've been applying the tenets from this plan and an anti-racist lens to those documents, and then putting them in front of a variety of communities in Oregon to give us more feedback. And we're still able to identify and name some equity impacts within those guidance documents that we're actively trying to, again, work with community to retool and think about how we can provide better guidance to our districts. So the guidance that we put out on June 10th for school next fall is being updated the first time on Tuesday. So tomorrow we'll put out an update to that guidance. And then on July 21st, we'll see the first update to that guidance that includes some changes around the equity impacts that it creates. And so we'll watch for that on July 21st and on August 11th. I think there I will stop. And
And Cole, just a quick follow-up to that, because I've talked to a couple of council members and superintendents, others, who've asked, as you look at guidance around the equity issue, is there going to be guidance that's going to include for school boards as well as, staff?
That's a good question. So the State Board of Education is considering some rule changes to have equity conversations more fully developed and included and representative of the student bodies of the racially and ethnically diverse student bodies of the districts they serve. So I would say that that's all in the development stage, that there isn't guidance specific to school district boards, except that they must follow the executive order, which names a couple of key pieces. So an anti-discrimination law that Oregon has on statute, and the Educator Equity Act. So our school districts that are going to experience, for a variety of different reasons, some revenue shortfalls, that they need to take into account the Educator Equity Act and try to preserve positions for teachers that reflect the population that is served in the district. So there are a few pieces in there, but more to come.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Any other questions from council members before we move on? Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, Colt, is there a timeline and a process set up for the kindergarten assessment retool?
I would say that we had a timeline, and Miriam may be able to speak to this as well, because it's really the Early Learning Division wrote and received a grant that will help inform how we need to think about the kindergarten assessment in the future. And we did do a series of meetings with early learning and K-12. I think it was last winter, wasn't it, Miriam? So we have some information from that. And then, so going forward, we would want to implement something for the fall of 21 would be the goal. But again, there are a number of equity concerns around the kindergarten assessment as it sat as well. It was a single language assessment and had a number of other challenges as well.
Okay, thanks. All right, well, that may be the segue into you, Miriam, since you are next on our agenda. Colt, thank you very much. We appreciate the update and all the work you're doing.
Thank you. I'll be, Sue, I'm sorry, I'll have to step out for a while in about 5 minutes to present to a different group.
Totally understand. Thanks for being here. All right, Madam Early Learning System Director.
Thank you. I think I'm going to talk fast because I have a lot to cover. I want to start by really thanking Khalid for her comments. I think just in the segue from Colt, I think assessment, both in our country around the policy around kindergarten assessment and including in our state, is one I think where we do have an opportunity to effectuate a lot of what Khalid said in terms of thinking about being racist or anti-racist policies and systemic change, to build on what Anne said. So I won't go into that in great detail, but I think there are a number of opportunities that abound with respect to our preschool development grant work, some of what we're realizing with our new SSA investments, to think about opportunities for moving forward equity in a number of different policy and investment areas. So hopefully, with this council, there will be another opportunity where we can sort of think about how we might dive into some of that as we think about early care and education. And the opportunities I think that we have ahead between ELD and the council. And of course, I just want to say, I also think about Raise Up Oregon and our vision of a comprehensive system where we are, really thinking about the comprehensive needs of young children and families and the conditions that they need for optimal development, so not just in terms of services, but what kinds of supports families have, including access to early care and education, but health, housing, strong K-12 schools, other supports. So I think that, don't want to lose sight of our guiding light as well around our joint.
Oops. Miriam, you've muted yourself.
Sorry about that. Thanks. I know we have time this afternoon. So with that, I want to, I'll touch on three topics really briefly: childcare sector guidance, emergency childcare grants, and the Student Success Act, early learning investments. So first on childcare revisions or sector guidance, we have initiated a process working collaboratively with Oregon Health Authority partners and providers, and have communicated to stakeholders that our goal is to release revised childcare guidance on August 14th. So working backwards from that date, we are doing a lot of stakeholder engagement right now. They're working on a pretty fast timeline. Last week, we completed a round of our weekly provider calls where we engaged providers around their areas that they were most interested in seeing revisions. And we're sort of checking for understanding on that. We have a number of stakeholder calls scheduled this week, sort of for the team working on the drafting revisions. We are also have launched a survey that's up on our website in 5 different languages, where we're inviting comments specifically on the guidance and changes. I'm really excited to say that for this round, we're also going to be looking at getting parent input into the childcare and emergency childcare guidelines. So I think both, through a survey mechanism that is also launching, but also working to hear the perspective of diverse families in multiple languages through some focus group work that we're planning. So that is that's sort of where we are with a revision to the childcare guidance. A lot of work happening. I also want to touch on now on the emergency childcare grants. So as a reminder for the council, at phase 1, we were distributing $8 million in CARES Act funds, specifically earmarked for childcare. We have to date distributed over 1,600 initial first payments to providers across the state that were awarded in phase 1. And 1,400 second payments to providers. So we're actively working through those. We did also launch phase 2 last Monday. So again, expanding another round of funding opportunity for providers who were not awarded in phase 1, or childcare providers, businesses that intend to reopen by September 1st. So we are still accepting applications until July 10th. And then our goal is to, by July 20th, begin notifying providers in phase 2. The amount of funds that we have been approved to spend in phase 2 is over $14 million in distributing these resources to providers. These are the same amounts by provider type that we awarded in phase 1. I did want to note the funding source for phase 2 is coronavirus relief funds. So several weeks ago, the legislature's emergency board allocated an additional $30 million in coronavirus relief funds that have come into the state, not specific to childcare, but they directed those monies specifically for childcare and phase 2. So we are going to be using those funds. What that means is that we both have a reserve of CARES Act funds specifically for childcare to work with and think about distribution to meet the ongoing needs of providers, think about equity in communities where we know we need to build a safe supply. We also have now an excess of coronavirus relief funds that will allow us to do more provide more support for providers, also to think about targeting and equity with respect to, with the remainder of those funds. I also did want to touch on, we've done some demographic analysis of both the early childhood workforce pre-COVID, so using our 2018 workforce data compared to those that are the workforce that is working in emergency childcare facilities. We also asked OSU to do that analysis and look at the workforce working in emergency childcare facilities that received grants in phase 1 compared to, again, 2018 workforce pre-COVID, and looking at the diversity, race, ethnicity, and language. And I think the good news is the workforce looks largely the same in terms of race, ethnicity, and primary languages spoken. I know I'm probably getting short on time, so I'll just close with a student success early learning account update. We have some very good news. We received approval at the end of last week to be able to move forward with intent to awards for a portion of the funds that were budgeted for the second year of the biennium in the early learning account. So not the full budgeted amount, but a substantial portion of the funds. So we sent a letter to all applicants and providers Friday that said we will be issuing notice of intent to awards on July 2nd for a number of the programs funded in the early learning account. That means that on July 2nd, the appeals period will begin as well. The appeal period will close on July 17th. And that means that as a council, we will need to be ready sometime between the week of July 27th to be able to have a short meeting to be able to consider all appeals, any appeals that were sent to the division around the grant award requirements. So I'll stop there and.
Okay, we will keep rolling. Any quick questions of Miriam? We've got about 1 or 2 minutes.
Miriam, this is Ann. What was the amount that was freed up to use for the student success early learning?
Sure. Why don't I'll put it in the chat. Is that allowable? Can we still public record? So everybody can see. I'll do it by program amount.
Or you can do it later.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions?
I had one quick question, Sue.
Yep.
Marion, you mentioned the stakeholders engagement. I'm wondering how providers are being notified of that engagement opportunities if they're not licensed. So for example, I'm not a licensed program. I did get from David the survey last week, but I haven't been receiving notifications about stakeholder meetings and the weekly calls that you're doing. Mm-hmm. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, so the weekly calls have been organized by provider type. And then I do a Spanish language call on Saturday mornings for all provider types. I think you'll have, for stakeholder engagement this week, we're looking at opportunities for K-12, engagement with Head Start. We talked at the last government to government meeting last week about doing some tribal consultation. We're looking at working with different partners and sort of advocacy groups. So again, and then the survey broadly. So we have a lot of different mechanisms for trying to reach families. So I think, Angie, you'll probably hear a couple of different ways, both through your work as a tribal director of education, and then also through Head Start.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. Appreciate your update very much. And let's go to DHS, and Liesl is with us. Welcome, Liesl.
Hi, thank you. Apologies for joining late, a little double booked today. And I saw 2 different asks. So Sue, would you like kind of a general update on key activities, or I saw there was another ask around budget exercise reduction information. So what would be your preference?
Probably starting with the former, sort of
Okay.
what's going on for you with early learning. And then if we have time to tag on your great budget news.
That's not the good news. So we'll start with the other. And hopefully that will just be an exercise.
Right.
So a couple things I wanted to highlight. I think I talked a bit about this last time we were all together, but DHS has definitely been in a unique position since the pandemic of needing to continue our operations. And we have done that largely by going to being roughly 80 to 90% of our staff teleworking, but we're still maintaining field operations. We've been doing pretty aggressive communication, letting people know that they can apply online or call to try to reduce the number of people in our lobbies. And that has been successful to varying degrees. Given the current landscape, we're really staying the course with that. I think I might have mentioned before, we've had a lot of innovation in the field, which has been exciting for us. We happen to have 2 of our buildings that used to be drive-through banks. So people are using that as a way to drop off SNAP applications or other kinds of applications, and just a really big success. The consumers are kind of enjoying some of the fun things our staff is doing and being outside with tents and balloons and just really trying to prioritize customer service during this challenging time. So wanted to share that that's continuing. We did a survey a couple weeks ago soliciting input from mostly our nonprofit providers, but some for-profit as well, just really trying to understand the potential impact that providers are facing, whether they're likely changing their business model, how worried are they about their solvency, what kind of extra supports are they needing, just so that we could get some situational awareness for what's going on. And we're just in the midst of compiling that information, and then we'll be sharing that back with the group that participated, and happy to share with others as well. I did want to, I think the focus for us the last month, 5 weeks, has really been a hard look internally at the agency around our equity work and our commitment to being an anti-racist organization. And a couple things I wanted to highlight there. One, we drafted an internal framework that we just shared with staff last week with a number of elements, both for our programs that have prioritized actions and then within our support functions. So just a couple examples are all of our programs recognizing the need to listen to staff of color, provide training opportunities for others. And also we've been doing some work around our HR recruitment and retention efforts, but have gotten much more aggressive with our timelines and expectations for progress we hope to see there. We've also drafted an external frameworks that's focused primarily on the African American community in Multnomah County. We've been doing some listening sessions with OHA and a firm commitment to stakeholders that we weren't just going to talk. We were going to hear people and then make commitments that we would hold ourselves accountable to. A couple of the key buckets there, especially, well, I shouldn't say especially, but looking at employment and workforce. So how is it that we're specifically focused on the BIPOC communities as we think about employment and workforce efforts when the economy kicks back in? I say that because when we wrote it, we all thought that we would be open and things would be going in a slightly different direction than they are now, given numbers. So a little caveat. And then basic needs, we do a good job. We like to think of providing SNAP and TANF and obviously ERDC. What we heard from community is what we're providing isn't still really meeting the flexible needs that they have. And so trying to be creative about whether it be gift cards or additional food resources that are more culturally specific, and trying to think creatively about how to partner with community action agencies, local counties, local CBOs in order to meet some of those needs in a slightly more creative way than we've done in the past. And I think, what I would say, just I know the question wasn't really around reflection, but what we've seen at DHS is we're a large agency. We don't move quickly well, and we've moved quickly well in the initial part of this pandemic. And so we're trying to take what worked about that and apply it to our racial justice work, is the deep commitment to being tangible with what we're committing to, delivering on results, hopefully, and talking about why we can or can't do that in a much more transparent way. So I say that because you're all welcome to hold us accountable to that. And it's, I think, a pressure that frankly all of us in state government need. is to start to make some short-term progress as we really dive in to take a look at the systemic issues, obviously as well. I don't know if Pat's talked yet, but we are working closely with OHA in creating a COVID response and recovery unit. We're calling it the CREW, and this is taking some of the response work from the initial parts of the COVID response and really recognizing that we're in this for the long haul, kind of 18 to 24 months. And so this will be what we call a shared service between the two agencies. And we're literally in the midst of the strategic planning for that unit. It has racial equity at the core of that work, and that's leading the planning. And we hope to have sort of a charter and more formal pieces in place over the next few weeks and months. So I really have appreciated the partnership with OHA. I think this crisis has, both crises have really prompted us to work together in new and different ways. So I think I'll end there and see if there's any questions.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Questions from council members? Peter.
Yeah, actually, Lisa, a comment on the section on child welfare, making note of the fact that parents who are separated from their children now have more access to see their children on a regular basis via platforms like this one. That's the best news I've heard in a long time. That's a great step forward. I'm sure it's going to help families in the reunification process.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you brought that up. Absolutely. We've been doing report outs with our local leadership twice a week, and they're coming up with just these great ideas that have potentially systemic benefits to them, right? Just that frequency, and it's saving time and travel for everyone, and really building stronger relationships. So appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, one of those silver linings, hopefully. Other questions from council members about DHS? I would just say, obviously, one of the programs that you all are operating is the whole ERDC, which obviously is very focused on early learning and childcare. And I know there have been lots of meetings, some of them are weekly, trying to make sure that the early learning work is aligned with what is happening at DHS in that specific program. I think we have a ways to go, but I really appreciate the commitment that DHS is making to having those conversations with lots of community partners at the table as well. So thanks.
Absolutely, no, appreciate that. And I know the team has been working hard to be that support function. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Any comments or questions? Okay, thank you, Lisa. Appreciate you being here. And Margaret Salazar, where did you go? You were on my screen.
I'm here.
There you are. Hi, Margaret. Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely. And I am crunched for time because I have another commitment. So, but I will try to give a picture of what's going on in housing and community services. Like all the agency directors, I think we're all learning that this is both a marathon and a sprint at the same time in this COVID response. A couple of things I'll just sort of share. I think what I've shared with the group before, and certainly working with Miriam and her staff, is, we were really looking at some kind of proactive campaigns to really focus on ending child homelessness. That is still our vision, but we have had to shift gears to really try to respond to the immediate economic crisis that's facing families throughout our state. And I have some really good news, which is that both the state and federal government have put significant resources on the table for rental assistance and energy utility payment assistance that we are administering. We were just talking this morning, since March, we've received $210 million new dollars for those two purposes, which is considerable for us. And so we are working very, very hard to get those funds out the door. They are administered by community action agencies. There are so many families that already were facing housing insecurity and instability, and through certainly no fault of their own during this pandemic have had reduction in hours or unemployment that is out of their control. And we need to make sure that those rental assistance dollars get out there for families. Really appreciated Cully's comments to kick off the meeting and all the conversation around equity and racial justice. We've recently brought on a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager that is now sitting on our executive team that is helping us to really bring that equity lens into all the quick decision making that we are having to use to get funds out the door in an equitable fashion. And frankly, having to stand up to the legislature to fight for that equity conversation because we are getting so much pressure to get funds out the door in record time and at a pace I have never experienced in my career. And if we do that quickly, guess what? We're not going to do it the right way. And we're going to only exacerbate the inequities out there, the housing inequities that we've seen. So we're trying to find ways to be creative, to both incentivize and find other ways to create partnerships with culturally specific housing providers. One thing we're really excited about is the work that we're doing with Oregon farm workers. We have a couple of different programs that we've stood up with the Department of Agriculture and working with the Oregon Human Development Corporation to provide support to both year-round residents as well as migrant seasonal farm worker families to make sure that they have safe and stable housing during this harvest season and beyond. So that is some work that we're specifically doing. You may be aware that the legislature just took action on Friday to extend the eviction and foreclosure moratoria, which is wonderful news because of course we're coming up on another first of the month, and it doesn't mean that folks have a rent holiday or a rent forgiveness, but that will get us time to get some of that rental assistance out into the hands of families that need it to prevent folks from falling into homelessness. We know that the rental assistance that we and others are administering is not going to be sufficient. And so we, I think, have to put on our thinking caps to think about what this means down the road as we move forward. I'll also mention that, and I think I mentioned this last time we spoke, so far the federal government has not put any assistance on the table for homeowners. So in the Great Recession, there was a considerable mortgage payment assistance. We have not seen that yet, and we're hoping that that will come in a future package from the federal government. We do have some resources left over from the Great Recession that are restricted to mortgage payment assistance. It's a program we were actually winding down, and now we're relaunching it, and we'll be accepting new applications for homeowners that fall behind on their mortgage payments. I also want to provide some good news, which is that construction has not, affordable housing construction is continuing. So we have made very clear through our own operations that the most important thing we can do is to be a steady stream of financing for affordable housing construction so that we can continue to address the need for affordable housing supply, particularly for family-sized units, because we know that there is just a huge shortage of 2 and 3 and 4 bedroom homes throughout our state. And so we put a record number of resources on the street this spring. We weren't sure what was going to happen, if folks were still going to be coming forward with their development proposals, but they did. And on July 10th, we will be bringing a new round of recommendations to our Housing Stability Council, which is our advisory policy committee, to make award recommendations for the LIFT program, which is a program that is really geared towards serving specifically communities of color with culturally specific partnerships. We now have an incentive in there where the culturally specific housing providers have an incentive to actually have a stake in the development, the real estate, so that they can try to build some wealth for their own organizations. We'll be making those awards next month. So that is a little bit of a bright spot for all of you to take away today.
Definitely a bright spot. And the whole idea of wealth building is such a core part of the equity discussion, I think. So that's very exciting. And, you know, as you talk about trying to get this money out the door, I know I've had that same conversation with Miriam, actually for a few months now. So, and we've got a couple of hundred grants going out the door now that the SSA funding's been freed up. So at some point, probably in the future, it'll be nice if we can try to have some of these grant programs intersect or align, or, you know, line them up to the extent possible. I know it's not now because we're all just trying to get them out.
That's the dream. I mean, I think that's the challenge, is that the big think around how to be, and I see the comment too from Colleen in the chat box. I mean, I think that's we were just training our staff on using an equity lens and getting that going. And we're at the beginning of this journey as an organization. I wish we were further along, but now it's like I said, it's a sprint. And so we would love to engage in those conversations about how we can be thoughtful cross-agency as well as with the equity conversation. And again, I think we're going to need the support of leaders like this council to speak up to legislators and say, you know what, it's worth taking an extra few weeks to get this right and to do the outreach to the community-based organizations and to do that intersectionality between the agencies, or we're not going to do get the kind of change that we want to see. So yeah. I would love further with any of you if you want to follow up and talk in more detail about that.
Great. Yeah, we may try to set that up as a smaller conversation. And just for information in the chat box, if there are questions, we will get responses to those later after this meeting. Margaret, thank you very much. Thanks for all the work you and your staff are doing. And we're excited to be partnering with you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Sorry to have to rush off.
We understand.
Okay.
I think all the agency directors are now in other meetings. Thanks, Margaret.
Bye. Thanks.
Wow. Okay, that's the fire hose, right? That we all hear about, dream about, and are a part of. So lots of good information. Miriam, thanks for putting in the chat box the breakdown on the Student Success Act funding to date. That's exciting to know that that's been approved and going out the door as we speak. So Council, this is the part of our agenda, as you know, where we're going to break into small groups, breakout groups. And we're fortunate that we have 3 fabulous facilitators who will join one of each of the groups, Harriet and Carrie, who are our wonderful build consultants, and then David Mandel, who's our wonderful everything. As I said earlier, what we're hoping to do is to have these small groups give us an opportunity for all of us to really talk about and share perspectives on what should be the priorities that we want to talk to Alyssa about at 3:15 when she comes from the governor's office. And we'll be giving her the recommendations from the council of what we hope the governor will prioritize around early learning system development, both in the near term, but then also looking further down the road at some system development work, perhaps in the next biennium. So it's immediate needs, but also longer term needs. So we'll break into these small groups with facilitators. If one of you council members will please agree to take some notes that would then be sent to Remy. And if one of you would agree to sort of report out after our break on what the conversation focused on, sort of what the outcomes of your conversation were, I would appreciate that. So we'll have those conversations. You know that in the packet, there was the executive summary of our Raise Up Oregon plan, as well as the 2-page listing of the objectives from the plan, because back in January, seems like 5 years ago, we prioritized 2 things. We said workforce and also the state-local connections. So we need to look at those priorities again and say, are those still the ones we want? Workforce is obviously huge. So do we want to focus on some parts of workforce in our conversations? And what other priorities in light of the new world do we think that the governor should be focusing on? And do we want to recommend to her? So yes. Remy has set up the small groups, but I also want to let the public know that the way this works with live streaming is that the live streaming will jump from one group to the next, and then around again. So you'll be hearing parts of each of the groups, and no votes, no decisions are being made in any group. That the group will report out to the full council when we come back at 3:30. And also know that they're being recorded. So the recording will be up on our website if you want to listen to the entire small group conversation with any of the three groups. So there'll definitely be public access to those conversations, but for now, live streaming, it'll be one at a time circulating. So anything else we need to set up, Remy, before we break into groups? Any questions from council members about this? And George is still on. So George, we know that you're driving, so you may be in and out of coverage. So just whenever you are able to participate, we'll appreciate that. So thanks for including us in your vacation plans.
Thank you as well.
Yeah, and thanks to your family who are driving in the car with you. Good luck. Okay, let's work your magic, Remy, whatever that is.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say two things. We're going to be in these groups until about 2:15, and there will be a 60-second warning. So at 2:14, I will give you a 60-second warning before you're automatically brought to the main session.
Okay, so we've got an hour to deep dive on what are our priorities, how do we be champions for early learning, short-term, long-term, where should this system development be heading? And it's a really great opportunity. I've talked with all of you before this meeting, but it's a great opportunity also for each of us to talk about what do we see in our own communities and regions and networks about what is going on in the early learning system development. So please share those ideas, because I think some of what's happening in different regions could end up being sort of scaled and applicable to a statewide approach. So please keep in mind, we've got time to do that kind of sharing as well. Okay. See you all in an hour.
So now let's kind of go back to our
Do you want me to
content.
share my screen so we can see what I'm capturing, or no?
Yeah, that's a nice idea, Miriam, because we're small enough that everybody should still be able to see each other, if you don't mind doing that.
No problem. Okay.
Okay, so that's great. And so
Just
as
need to
Miriam
eat a little
said,
bit of cottage cheese. Okay.
that's
sorry.
fine. You can eat your
All right.
lunch, no
Okay.
problems. Okay, everyone can
With
eat, do whatever
blueberries.
you need to do. Okay, everybody's getting used to, like I said, someone was all worried the other day because they were afraid of showing their animal. And I was like, I think the rules have changed. Like, it's fine that you have your animal in your garden and all these things now. Okay, so the idea here again is we have three big areas: content, funding, and sort of synthesis, like the most important things for the three of you. And the idea was really to think about basically Raise Up Oregon, which was set forth, as a plan through 2023 as a 5-year plan. And I know Miriam and Sue have this memorized. So Cully, if I am reviewing things that are really in your heart, you tell me to stop talking and we'll just plunge into the content. But right, you had the 3 goals around children arrive ready for K, children in healthy, stable, attached families, and the early learning system as aligned, coordinated, and family-centered. You have the 5 sectors that come together. So early care and education, Miriam's shop, human services, housing, health, and K-12. And then there were the 14 objectives and then 6 core values. And I am going to just remind people of what those are, because one was equity and cultural responsiveness. Second was enlisting and empowering family voice. Third was being cross-sector within the totality of the early learning system. Fourth was developing collaborative relationships with communities. Fifth was continuous improvement, especially through professional development of staff. And sixth was using data to make decisions and to measure outcomes. And so with that as background, I mean, let's open it up maybe to the first one, which is thinking about where you are now. What do you see as content priorities, basically for the next year and by 2023? And in the handout, we gave a couple examples. So they could have been, you know, positive changes that some of which have been reported on, right, by the agency directors today, behavioral health focus, a sustainable governance model, professional learning for the workforce. Those are some potential examples that could inform your thinking about content priorities. So who wants to kick it off?
I have a question, Miriam. One, I was thinking when they talked about the integration of the different sectors, it occurs to me like they're all there at the council meeting regularly, which is great. But Margaret, I think it was Margaret, commented on wanting to learn from the division, which made me wonder how integrated are the systems at the policy level and maybe training as well. And do you feel like, I don't know, I'd love to hear from you in terms of, because I think the vision was for greater integration, not just being present. And I can't tell if that has happened or not.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I think that's a great question. I would say, not very. I think it, and when it is, I think it's like more project or initiative driven, right? And we have some wins on that too, right? And so it's not like there hasn't been. And I think RUI Act is making sure that there's sort of more communication on an ongoing manner. And, Sue, you may, have also a point of view on that with RUI Act. But I mean, I feel like improvements in ongoing communication, I think around a like shared North Star, I think it's been proven probably helpful as well during COVID to get more of that sort of communication needs in real time around the different impacts. And so that has lent itself, I think, to like it being project or initiative driven. But to me personally, I feel like I'm just going to throw it out there that some of that work is going to start to have to happen in how we better define the regional and community partners of each of these sectors and have like some, think about our levers to make sure that there's like actual bi-directional accountability around communication and kind of alignment. Like, I guess when I just think about it, like, and again, there, some better than others. Hubs have made a difference, certainly in that region, particularly probably with CCOs. I mean, I know Margaret and I have talked like in passing about, community action agencies. I think at one point this year, I'm not sure if I may still, if this has happened or if it was canceled, I can't remember. I was going to speak to the Community Action Agency Association. They're like the primary partner of housing and community services. So I don't know if that helps at all, sort of kind of, I think more work
to enable
needs to be
some
done
models and some pilots that actually make some economic sense and achieve our goals of high quality, equity, and accessibility. And I just think that throwing money at providers right now is going to keep the doors open a few more days, and then that's it. Because of the limitations that we have to deal with to keep everybody safe. So if we don't do something about it right now, shame on us.
Thank you. I know I'm facilitating, but I will just add an editorial comment. I think this is the first moment in my professional career where I've seen childcare recognized so broadly as part of the essential economic infrastructure of the society. So I think there's at least a beginning of a recognition of the role that childcare is playing. So I think at least an opening for this conversation on how do we think about an actual childcare system that has some basic economic logic to it. So anyways, I will go back to my facilitating call.
Hear, hear.
Eva, Anne, do you want to jump in?
Go ahead, Eva.
Thanks. So yes to all that George and Katie have said so far. And I think a little bit to a specific suggestion, and I think that this is where the Healthy Kids Council that the governor's putting together may have come from me suggesting this, but I think to help sustain the childcare workforce and to help meet the needs in the moment of families and children in working through our distance learning or however school is going to work in the fall, that we really need to figure out how do we really build on the existing childcare workforce that we have and quickly get others up and running to meet the need of the bigger childcare needs, especially if children aren't in school a full day every day, you know, if they're doing distance learning. And how do we connect those childcare and have smaller cohorts that match the, like if there's a hybrid of, you know, the kids are in school, you know, half day on Monday and Wednesday, that cohort is at least part of that same group that's together on Monday and Wednesday, so that we're not mixing, you know, like we're not increasing risk of exposure. So it's going to be a delicate dance, but I think it's important for numerous reasons. As David just pointed out, we have the recognition that childcare is essential to economic stability and is so important for families to be able to work, and that we need to have a and to Katie's point, we need to have a well cared for and economically stable childcare system. And we need parents to be able to work. They can't, I say we because I'm included in this. We can't continue to work and provide for our children in a way that is necessary for all of us, and be their school teachers as well. And then, you know, for the families who have, you know, that also have school as their safety net for ensuring their kid has a place to go during the day and has access to 1 to 2 meals a day, if not additionally snacks too. How do we build a system that is maybe inclusive of childcare providers in that, so that maybe we're not just saying you have to be working full time to be able to access childcare, but we're also meeting support needs of families. Again, I don't know exactly what it looks like, kind of like, you know, Katie, you just said we need to be flexible, but what does flexibility look like right now? But I think our childcare community and our families have lots of ideas that we could quickly figure out if we had the right people at the table to do that. So that's more of an immediate
but I think it'll have a long-term impact on, continuing to build our workforce and providing stability in that too.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. Hi, this is Anne. I just want to say ditto to things that have gone before us, what everybody has said before. I do think the childcare issue is just absolutely premier critical, and I appreciate Katie saying that maybe this is a moment to sort of rethink the entire system. I hope that's the case. In rural Oregon, we just have so few institutional resources and to be able to provide the childcare, and no flexibility whatsoever. I mean, I think whatever we're saying about what's wrong with the economics of childcare, the capacities, the space limitations, transportation limitations are only just exacerbated in rural areas, and none of our workers can go back to work without childcare. They just can't. And I think the point that Eva was just making about yes, it's early learning, but I wonder the questions that people are having is also what's going to happen to their K-6 kids who are not going to be supervised, who are going to need to be supervised if they're not going back to school. And can there be a more seamless way of thinking about that? I don't know, but that's where the flexibility that Katie and Eva are talking about might make a big difference. But it is a major crisis for everybody in rural Oregon, as well as I'm sure in urban Oregon. The other thing that we have not talked about in terms of content has to do with behavioral health, child abuse, and the family supports there. I mean, we live in a part of the state where the reports of child abuse and neglect were going up, basically almost doubling every year for the last few years. And the fact that the reports of child abuse and neglect have declined by 70% is just horrific to us, because we know that those parents are at home and feeling really stressed and having not the support that they need. Maybe the innovations that have come up that actually Pat Allen was pointing to about virtual connections between family support organizations, workers, et cetera, whether it's home visitors or other kinds of parenting education and relief nursery folks. Maybe the creation of virtual ways of doing that is something that can stick with us for a while. Again, if we're talking about rural areas, that's still really hard. But I think we are terrified about what's happening with kids in their homes right now with highly stressed parents, and what's going to happen when we reopen, if we reopen. How are we going to handle all of what the teachers or the other mandatory reporters start to see again? It's really scary.
I hope you don't mind if I ask just a follow-up question, because I think one of the things I've been hearing a little bit about is that where broadband access had always been sort of an equity issue, particularly for rural communities, it's now also a healthcare issue and a family support issue. So just wanted to see if that's also something that's coming up in your work with rural communities.
Absolutely, and it's really the education thing.
Go back to work when, etc. Right. But the people working in the workforce, they need to be able to earn a living wage and have livable benefits. I mean, it's absolutely crucial for that to happen. Otherwise, that just adds to the family instability problem, because they have families, and they take care of families. Right. And so I would still say it's pretty central to our efforts.
And I want to talk about access to and that would be objective number 2, families have access to high quality, affordable early care and education that meets their needs. So that responsiveness also attaches to objective number 2. But I specifically want to talk about access around two things, really. One, the childcare desert, and places like here in my community, I'm the only provider.
Right.
But two, really the affordability of access. And I'm thinking specifically about, OPK and Preschool Promise are needs-based programs that are run through the ELD. But the ERDC is a needs-based program that's run through DHS. And they're two different systems. And I think they need to be one system. And it doesn't make much sense to turn OPK and Preschool Promise over to DHS. So it makes more sense that ERDC was part of early learning, and all those programs could be tied together. And they're all needs-based programs.
Right.
We're already enrolling and, serving people, at various degrees of poverty through OPK and Preschool Promise. And ERDC also needs to expand. We need to be able to serve more people.
Absolutely.
Through ERDC, because providers can't afford to provide it for any less. We're going to have to access whatever dollars are available. So I want to make sure that one also stays on the radar. But I totally agree with what Peter said about workforce. It's still a central issue. If we want to serve families, we have to have the workforce.
Are you seeing that as you get clearer about family needs, that also puts a certain pressure on the workforce? I was just trying to think about if they're of the community and they're kind of experiencing the same thing. So, but they're supposed to have a space where they can offer family support or be responsive. And so I just didn't know if you had reflections. I was trying to think about if we raise some of these issues around workforce and what do we really mean by access, how do we tie in the conversation that you had around family stability, high anxiety, the desire to connect one way or another.
Yep. Workforce needs to be trained in family engagement. And I've been thinking about that with my own team because they've been doing a lot more outreach to families. So we're a 5-day-a-week program. So my teachers are generally with kids Monday through Friday. So we have a different set of staff that do family engagement. But that's not the way I wanted it. It's just what I inherited. Now that we're in the pandemic, I've had my teaching staff, I tell them, you are the permanent contact for these families. I want them to be communicating more regularly with them. And so I've been thinking, like, if we're going to continue with this model for a period of time, my staff need a lot more training on that family engagement, how to talk to families, I think my staff knows a lot about the families, but they're used to talking to little kids. They're not used to talking to adults.
Nice.
And that training piece is really important if we want to be responsive, then we do need that training.
That's not just in early childhood. It's K-12 sucks at family engagement. It just it does.
So maybe that could be one of our areas of shared collaborative professional development, K-12 and early learning all together. Some family engagement training. So I have 4 things. I don't know if that's pretty much what you have, but I have the social emotional health for parents and children.
Yeah.
Access and affordability / ERDC, responsive to family need, and the workforce.
Yep.
And I have a few things under each one of those too.
That's great. So when you think about the social emotional health for children and families, what are you thinking about? Because I think it could be a whole continuum of informal and formal. So I was wondering, like, when you guys were talking about it, what do you think about the informal supports for families around and children around social emotional health? I think there's been some conversations trying to use PDG to help think about early childhood mental health consultation being available to teachers and directors and home providers. But I think some people also think about the formal mental health system and the access to assessment or treatment or some kind of counseling support. So what were you guys kind of picturing or thinking about?
We're adopting the Strengthening Families framework. Just trying to use that cross sector and just trying to look at those protective factors. When do families need concrete help? How do we find out if they need concrete help?
Right.
How can we help enhance social emotional skills for parents and for children? So that framework does a good job of giving us a way to go kind of in a systematic way to strengthening families, to which we're all about. So it's a variety of things, not just a single source. It's kind of like the concrete resources, the tools for self-regulation. How do we get information to new parents? Are we consistent with the way that we get information to new parents so they can understand a little bit more about how their kids' brains develop and the impact of trauma and the tools for resilience?
I agree. I think it is a continuum, and it is the informal as well as the formal. So we have mental health consultation model here at the program, and we're actually looking on bringing that in-house. Right now we contract, and we have somebody that provides services, but we're looking at bringing that in-house for the whole education department within the tribe, from pre-K, from birth really through 12. Because we have other programs here on campus that serve children and families in the upper grades. And so I think that the informal is really important. That's supportive of, really, it's the teachers and the parents, the consultant. But we also do direct service as well. So those kids that rise to that level can also get play therapy on site during the day, the school day here. But then informally, it's those parenting education opportunities that are focused on social emotional learning. And that's the direction I'm really going to try to start getting my staff to go. If we continue remote learning, I want to focus more on social emotional health with parents. Like, here's what you could do at home to support your kids. And this is what you're seeing. Because parents, they want an answer that's, what do I do when my kid does X or Y? My kid's always doing, and really there isn't an easy answer. It's going back to those basics of the social emotional health. So it's definitely a wide continuum. And so it's kind of like you want to do these universal things for everybody, and then tiered approach.
Yeah. I think it's great if you get somebody in the house, Angie. That would be remarkable.
I am so excited that my boss, I've always wanted this, and then I can't really find it in my budget for full time, but she said she really wanted it for the other grades. So I said, I'll put up half of the salary if you put up the other half, and I get 20 hours a week. I'm just really thrilled about it.
Oh yeah.
And it's the person we're contracting with. He's ready to take a new job. He would love to be here full time. So we even have a transition of providers. It would be the same provider. Wow.
Right. And then if you could get a committed 20 hours,
Yeah. Really big deal.
So the second question is kind of funding priorities. So as you kind of think about what's facing our state, Peter, maybe your insight about the legislature works and where the governor has flexibility and that kind of thing. You can see, some of the examples are to help us think about, are there some things that maybe the council members should communicate about protecting, minimizing? I think there's been a national movement of a lot of the national orgs that I'm part of thinking about how do we create frameworks or ways of helping states think about build back better, like when there are cuts, what's the opportunity to change how things are built? And I feel like some of your BRUAC members are kind of thinking along those lines.
We would just have to be able to,
And I think a lot of that, I also want to note that Oregon is farther ahead than a lot of other states.
Yeah.
And so I think even that report, I thought there was some really, obviously good to review and things that we can learn, but I think that report is probably in states that even aren't as far along as Oregon.
There's no question about that, because I think I'm running through a process very much like the report for Alaska now, but they have nothing in place. Here, you basically were talking about, honestly, a few sets of actions. There's some remaining programs that would need to come into the ELD. It's not very many, okay, at this point. And then there is the decisional process around making it its own cabinet agency, right? And so, but there's been a lot of work here that I think would accelerate the pace of being able to do this. And then I only want to say, and Miriam is aware of this, the thing I did in Pennsylvania, which is long-standing at this point, had zero public process. And we did it extremely quickly. The governor,
That's
you know, it was in the
why.
primary campaign documents for the governors. Both the Democrats put it in when the one won. Basically, we did it extremely rapidly. And so, notwithstanding some of our publications that might say it's whatever, you guys have done a lot. You've done a lot that was public already, and you have a lot in place. And so, I my own just experience is there's not a single way to get to these results. It's more that you have to look at what is the result you want to have. And here you've got two missing pieces at this point, right, that hopefully could be embraced by the governor and acted upon.
Okay, great.
So Miriam, the way that we have this set up, just when we get to financing, that's a new header. You don't have to, but we have our next issue is, or do you want to call that? Because our next one is funding priorities.
I feel like I'm trying to make a distinction to build off something that Kali said earlier, which I thought was just like, you know, I think, you know, but maybe we can tackle it in funding priorities. But I just think about like financing is a, you know, longer term kind of North Star. I mean, it's almost.
I see what you're saying. You're talking about scalable funding. Scalable funding. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't understand, Miriam.
And like what that, you know, and then obviously there's, you know, I think shorter term, you know, there's prioritizing within, but yeah.
Okay, so your recommendation was a fourth priority, basically, for content is to keep working on scalable funding, right? And getting your resources to the point, you know, that you actually have enough to do everything you want to do, cover all the children, equitable compensation, equitable system, that kind of thing.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Continue to develop strategy. What did you say? Oh, sorry, Kali, go ahead.
No, you go. You finish. I'm sorry.
Okay, Harriet, you said to develop a strategy
for sustainable scale, for a scalable, funded, equitable system.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Equitable, you know, system of services for children and their families.
Okay.
To not forget who we're trying to serve. Right.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Got it.
All right. So now, Miriam, now we have another bullet, and this one is funding priorities.
Hey, before we switch to that, I have a question. Does that infrastructure, Miriam, help with the scaling of, I remember talking to you about the fact that like a lot of the providers right now, there's not, it's not scaling, it's consolidation of services and service delivery so that things like cleaning services across childcare can be occurring in sort of a consolidated fashion versus this piecemeal, everybody does their own. Would the, because I think that was something that struck me, and I recall hearing from the family care providers that we've worked with, like that's a huge thing. So I feel like it should be a priority given that we're in a health crisis in particular.
Yes, exactly.
To be able to offer some of those services in a centralized way.
Right.
So
that's a good segue. Is that our first funding
Let's do that for a funding priority.
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah, I think, and also they'll get mushed together. We were just trying to, Kali, find a way to help you organize the conversation. You guys are doing a good job because you don't have a large laundry list. You actually have been pretty specific, you know, around items that I predict Sue can brief us on.
Yeah, but we haven't talked yet about, I mean, I guess this is where childcare is going to show up. Yeah. And certainly there's a lot of talk now about how are we going to support the providers to support the children and the behavioral issues that they're probably going to see because of being cooped up for 4 or 5, 6 months.
So one funding priority might be then listening to you. So one funding priority, one way, I don't know if we want to say it this way, but the way it's getting talked about around the country is really the concept of operating supports for the child care providers, right, on health and safety, right, as you know, as one of them and other areas, but to start to recognize. And the other way maybe is we are seeing governors now moving to protect their child care expenditures. There are some governors who are saying they're not going to do any cuts in child care. We definitely, like in my home state, it was not good enough. It was only no cuts in pre-K and Head Start supplemental, and they've reserved the decision on child care for the moment. But there are definitely, like, believe it or not, Texas, the governor already said there will be no cuts to the child care budget, of all places. So I just, you know, so that was interesting, right? Is like, who would have thought that the governor would have said that?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way of thinking about that too, that I don't know, you know, whether you all want to, I know Miriam wants to say this, which is protect the early childhood budget, make it a cut-free zone.
Yeah, I'll just
Right.
put it. Yeah,
Okay.
I wanted to say something about the also, I think, covering the operating costs to sort of what you
Yeah.
were saying and what we were talking about, Kali, is it also feels like you know, it's such a different way. It could be done in such a different way of financing that could be really game changing for the ECE sector, because we really do fund on a per child cost basis. And, you know, I think something that we're starting to, you know, what we could do kind of in these operating grants is to think about like what, how to set, like provide resources to programs, right, to actually offset kind of some of these costs. And, you know, because we target through like usually the eligibility of the child or the family and reimburse on a cost per basis. And so it becomes yet another funding stream and source of funding that is siloed in and I don't think in a way of it and ends up allowing us to leverage, I think, public dollars to think about raising quality kind of overall, you know, because it's, you know, getting it that way, not to get too in the weeds on this, is like still just, you know, getting a portion of your operating costs funded, but maybe not all, you know, and I think leads to just a lot of complications in the field, especially for programs that, you know, are serving economically diverse families, or aren't able to have all of their slots covered by public funds, even if they are serving children and families who would all be eligible for public funds. So, you know, it's a different way of saying, what are their actual costs for cleaning or supplies or rent, and like what's an appropriate subsidy for that entire program?
It's actually interesting, Miriam, because you put it in there in a somewhat, I think it's realistic, right? But as you said, somewhat narrow way. In other words, it would be a win to have the state establish an operating support fund for everybody. Okay, and that have it be directed towards the public health issues, which are pretty real, right? And especially, Miriam, if you end up with child staff ratios, right, close to where they are now, do you see? Then that, you know, right, you could also take this concept and extend that, right, to other key elements. Kali, like you talked about that at the opening, the importance of quality. Okay, and that quality is a necessity for every child. So you could take this idea and make it into a quality idea too.
So I think that this is going to be controversial, so it may not be politically feasible, but then I think what we ran into with I think it was with SSA and the fact that K-12 could access the dollars for early childhood. Is that right, Miriam? Without any oversight in the administration of the funds. Like that has to change.
Pursue. I just hope we get out of our own way to get it done. Spoken like a true business person, maybe. I don't know, but I'm not really. I mean, I spent 20 years in the public sector. I get the whole 360 of this, but I just think that necessity is the mother of invention, and boy, it's time to invent.
And what I heard you say, Katie, is that one of the key obstacles to, one of the key things that would limit our ability to invent is the fear of liability. And if we could remove that from the equation, that could break open a whole lot more creativity.
Yeah, and I think that there's also opportunity to really achieve, there are a lot of cooks in this kitchen. And let's just say an example, we assimilate all the great work that we've done, how we want to, what quality means, add the equity lens, and for example, fund someone's pilot for a year of providers across the state that we trust that get it, and say, I'm paying you this much a year to start a micro center program. I want you to open up at least a half a dozen within a year. I'm making this up, obviously. And here's a criteria you know about because you've been working with us. You know what quality means, and you know what early brain development means, and you know what we mean by an equity lens. And here's some money. We're going to give you some guidance, but we're going to let you go do this and do it fast. And we're going to give you a break on the liability. We're going to back you up in this way. Go forth and prosper. So it's a public-private venture, in other words. That would be one way of doing something like that. And then say, here's what we want to achieve, and we'll be helping you along the way, but not get mixed up in the nuts and bolts of it too much.
Yeah.
Just an idea.
I think that, the liability conversation, we have this specific COVID lens right now. And as to, George pointed out that the insurers aren't covering communicable or dropping communicable disease or diseases.
Can we just pause for a moment and how ridiculous that is? Just in the middle of a pandemic, and now we're not going to cover it anymore.
Yeah.
Continue.
No. I think, part of what we maybe could ask, which I know that public health, because that's the other board I sit on, is the public health advisory board for the state. But I think we need to have clearer guidances and instructions about what forms of protection people need in various settings. Like if you're in, a one room micro center that has access to one bathroom or whatever, what layers of, what are the things that are absolutes? Like, is wearing a mask that's changed every 2 hours, or, and how does that impact your health in other ways too? Because I think, it's a layered complication for sure. But, what types of settings need what things, and would that make insurers feel better if employers that include childcare are checking, childcare in school are absolutely checking these boxes, knowing that there's always going to be a certain level of risk if you're not completely isolated. What will get them to a place that's okay? Is it clearer guidances? Is it clearer guidances that are broken down by different types of areas and work types, or, and how do we ensure that then those various settings have access to those appropriate levels of protection? So I guess that would be a funding thing too, but that's funding for all workspaces. If we're going to no longer pay people to stay home to avoid spread of COVID, we should be taking that money and spending it on ensuring that we keep people the safest we possibly can.
So thinking about the money question for a minute, So we're likely to have a second special session pretty soon to rebalance the challenging budget. But we also know that there's going to be a much more difficult budget conversation starting next year. And the governor has already started the process of building her requested budget, and that's really going to happen between now and November. So what are the things that you want to, as a council, share with the governor as she and her team are building their requested budget? Or are there things just in terms of principles of priorities or specific areas that you want to make sure as the council you're asking the governor to be part of that process?
Have we developed a kind of a guideline book for childcare providers? Have we developed a resource in this time period for them to follow with healthcare, as well as systems of support that they should be working with or using? And if not, then I would say, us making sure that we have something like that. I'm sure we do. So I'm sorry if it's like something that I'm bringing up that's improper, but that's important to me, making sure that we have the health needs or health requirements of workers in mind and children in mind and those that come in contact, having enough safety equipment, having enough resources like that. If there is money set aside for that, for childcare locations, that would be important to me. So
Ava?
I'll stop for right now.
I would say that I think I just stick by what I've already said, David. I think that there needs to be a slice of money that goes toward funding pilots. And the pilots criteria is maintaining quality, generally, and something that's scalable. This is what the business sector looks at on a viable approach to anything, is if you really want it to work and you want it to grow and be accessible to more folks, and it's got to have some sort of scalable approach. So I think it is a priority that if we're going to allow some flexibility at this time to really reinvent, is to try some stuff. And it needs to be something that can be deployed very quickly, that achieves the things that we want, and creates economic models. The outcome is something that's scalable with an economic model that makes sense. And to do it now and to have that part of the budget that they discuss next month, I think would be really great. And don't talk about it for 6 months or a year. Do it. Go and do it. These models exist all over the country. So go identify, come up with some criteria. I know the task force is not quite sure what the outcomes of the childcare task force are. I've been a little confused over that. And but take the best work that's been done so far by the ELC, by the Early Learning Division, and try some pilots and designate some funds for that. In the existing world, I think that we need to continue to find ways to boost these folks, because they are not going to be able to make it without some sort of financial assistance. The folks who are already out there, if we don't want to lose more, we got to figure out some cover. So how do we identify
you may increase you appreciate the support and then you vote, versus others that really treat you inhumanely, and then that tends to decrease participation.
Yeah.
So I'll find her book for you, Peter, because it is an interesting area of research that she's doing.
Well, along the same lines, I have to say I'm really impressed with there's kind of culture change happening with DHS in our region, hopefully across the state. But it's like a really significant change. I mean, they are working tremendously hard to keep families together. You know, family coaching model, that type of thing. It's impressive. Their language has changed. Their approach is changing. They developed a regional resource guide. They put out every Monday an updated resource guide, so all the agencies know what the most recently updated resources are. And it's much more proactive and positive.
Did you see in Remy's memo that she sent out on Friday of some of the kinds of strategies the state agencies have been doing since COVID in the child welfare area? They had been doing daily virtual connection with families instead of like the twice a week, and they're finding real benefit from that daily interaction that previously would have, that they'll probably never go back.
Yeah.
Right. Like even if they finally get to do in person again, they'll still keep the assumption that there should be daily contact. Right.
That's fantastic. I really do. Good stuff.
And on one hand, you're like that should have been so obvious, but it almost is like a crisis that says, how are we going to do this? And then you realize how everyday it is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that it is possible to do, to kind of do that.
Yeah. So I work out of the Southern Oregon Education Service District offices, and they've had these policies about really frowning on remote work, It's just not workable. And now after 3 months, they're kind of like, we might switch to this model. It seems to be it's holding down costs. It's,
right. Especially if we want to increase funding that's available to the actual services or supports.
Right. Exactly.
If we can save costs in another area, how does that help us?
Oh, goodness.
Well, this has been a really great conversation, you guys, and I'm excited about what you'll be reporting out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from the other groups too.
Yeah.
We've been going through this process within our collaboration for the past 2 weeks. We have our final meeting tomorrow. And as I mentioned at the start, the desire for every sector to move upstream as much as possible is really strong. We had some interesting discussions with the workforce development people and some of the small business owners about family stability in regard to even work schedules. Can we have consistent work schedules? And a way to agree that that's a priority for us. And just a lot of interest in the same thing we've been talking about now. These are the same discussions I've been having with our partner organizations for a couple of weeks now. And I'm cautiously optimistic we'll come out of tomorrow going through a process similar to this with some really specific pilot projects that we can pursue. Things like the earned income tax credit. Maybe we'll do a campaign around the earned income tax credit every year, so that families know it's there and that they should apply for it.
Right.
So the other major suggestion was, do we start a campaign to have a school-based health center at every elementary school, and acknowledge the fact that K-12 is really looked to now to be a coordinator of social services, and can we do that through a school-based health center without putting additional burden on the educators? So the school-based health centers we have here are doing fantastic work, and they've been really, really helpful. So
it's really that creativity of where a family is already going, right?
Exactly.
And how do you meet them there instead of always asking them to go to 5 million other places?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I looked up that article you were talking about, the rapid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll have to save that and read it later.
Nice.
Yeah. RAPID stands for Rapid Assessment of Pandemic Impacts on Development. Early. Yeah.
Did you just Google U of O rapid?
Yep. I did.
Nice.
I did. I have 2 computers here. I have my laptop because my computer on my desk does not have a camera. So I'm using my laptop for that. But then my computer's right here. So
cool. Look at this. Great.
So if we're done, maybe we can break early.
Yeah, you can definitely break early. And if you just leave your computer there, right, Remy, the system will automatically bring them back to the main room. They don't have to click in on anything. So yeah, you could have an extra 5 minutes to your break.
Might as well. Might as well take it.
Right, exactly.
Yes. We'll move. Thanks. See you in a
Thank
bit.
you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
Those are the ones here that might seem the most remote and seem like, well, why would we do this now? But I think we know enough to know that if you don't get going with them, then they can't get going. And the others, I think when you look at that list, they seem more next step-y. Do you know what I'm saying? They seem more obvious than those two. So I just, you may want to say that or not.
So
as
maybe
you talk to the
Khalid could
group.
report those out as sort of the longer term, and then some of
Right.
the other ones are like in the next year, kind of.
I mean, governance and financing. Is
Yeah, yeah. Like we have to start planning because we want to see kind of wins like out 2023, but some of these other pieces are like near term.
Okay.
Is that
Can you share this document with me? Is there a way?
Yeah, that's a good, they're going to email it to us, but I agree, Miriam, your notes are really great. And so I think then we don't need to wait till we do the consolidation.
Term. Yeah, and then I think you can touch on these other ones as shorter term.
But I'm worried if we say they're longer term, that means nobody's going to talk about them until after the next legislature.
No, things we have to start now, but I think
we don't expect to execute.
We don't want to have. We don't expect to have a win next year necessarily. I mean, the final finish line next year, but we can have
So in a way, we're changing the answer to the question, because the recommendations, these are all recommendations that you guys think are important. All of them need to be worked on in the coming year. They will not all be achieved in the coming year. But in order to get to any of them, you can't not work on them, right? So we're modifying, in a way, the third question, okay? Or we're saying these all need to be shared because they all need to start and in this next time period.
So say that last part again, Harriet, about priorities. The sentence you just said, we have to start.
Oh, in order, all of them need to be worked on during the coming year, and that while some of them, Miriam, may take longer, right, than a year to achieve, if you don't start to work on them, then you're just putting off getting them. Right. It's not exactly what I said. I probably said it better before.
Right.
Well, I think the other question for me is, as we put all this together, so where does the council fit into this? So we aren't just saying to Miriam, go do all of these things, but at some point we've got to talk about what's the council's role in working with the governor to move this agenda forward.
So what kinds of things are you thinking about?
Yeah, I don't know if, we want to have a legislative strategy, for instance, where we really work with the governor, but we work with some of the leadership in the legislature to start talking about this agenda.
Great. I think it's going to, I think the next session is going to be really swallowed up by the budget deficit situation. And I think some of the things we wanted to advocate for before were impacted by the fact that SIA took up all the oxygen. So we were able to advocate for things we believed in and, language, but I think it's going to be like that. But this other thing is going to suck up all the air in the room. So I don't know what's realistic I'm not suggesting that we don't. I just don't know that I have the thing counting down. I don't know.
Well, it'll give you a lot to talk about, and it'll be fun to see if the other groups, like how the things you all put on the table now compare to the other ones.
Yes, it will be.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to move back inside.
Yeah, they're going to take us back. You guys have a break. We'll work on synthesis.
Right.
Miriam, you're going to send to Remy and to all of us. Yeah, great. Thank you, Miriam, for taking the notes.
Sure. Okay.
Bye. Thank you both. See you in 15 minutes. Let's just go through, and I think each group has a reporter, and Kali is the reporter for our group. So Kali, maybe you can lead off. And while we're doing this, just so you know, Harriet and Carrie are in their own little room trying to synthesize from the three groups. So we have kind of a consolidated list to discuss after the three report outs, and then decide what to present to Alyssa. So, okay, so Kali, as our reporter for group one, and you're muted.
Okay, so our content priorities. So a couple of these are probably longer term priorities that we felt were really important to get started with now. And then the rest are shorter term. All of them we would say are important to be focused on right now. One goes in the category of unification, alignment of community work and partners across sectors centered in equity. I have a lot of background noise, I'm sorry. I don't know what my kids are doing. Sorry, I just got really distracted.
If you need to check on them, feel free. Kids come first.
Oh, thank you. I think they're alive, so that's good.
Okay.
So centering equity, and I think our conversation was really around the fact that there are different agencies that we've been able to bring together, but that the processes and alignment of the work and partners are not occurring across agencies. So there's a desire to see more of that. There was a conversation about bringing agency directors, bringing this focus to the children's cabinet, so there's shared decision making around it. And I think we acknowledge there is like shrieking. Hopefully you can't hear all the commotion upstairs in the house. There was an understanding that the early childhood or the ELC and ECE space is a little ahead of the curve when it comes to agencies in terms of centering equity in processes and policies, and that the other agency directors would benefit from even more shared language and conversation around how do you operationalize things that you're putting forward from a policy perspective. And that is important right now. One of the longer term things was governance and really developing an early learning system, consolidating the early learning programs that are sort of in different places, and in maintaining a consistent policy focus on implementation. So EDRC, district level public funds, location of different ECE programs, all centralized in one space. And so really ensuring that we have high quality service delivery through this centralization and alignment. And the importance of ECE as its own separate agency to attain and sustain system development. And so again, this was one of the things that, and this can be budget neutral. It doesn't have to be, but it could be. The facilitator in our group has done this in Pennsylvania, and so it can be done, and it really does help utilize the funds that you do have more efficiently and effectively. And so we felt like this was one that we need to start now if we're going to see it bear fruit, even a couple of years out. On the financing, that was another priority, continue to develop strategy for scalable and sustainable equitable systems of services and supports for young children, address the inequities that all of us have brought up in the workforce compensation, as well as the conditions, ensuring that we reach into communities with diverse populations of children and families, and then just funding. I mean, I think we all know, I don't have to go much longer there. I think we all know that there is not sufficient funding. And so how do we support the financing of a quality early learning system? And that's something that also we realize is not going to happen overnight, but that we have to build political capital and will around that happening. And then the professional learning system, we have to do a better job of reducing barriers for people of color to advance in the profession. There are a lot of, we feel, barriers and biases that prevent access to training and degrees and credentials and leadership opportunities. And so we have an opportunity to do that. And as a council, certainly advocate and support that from a policy perspective. Our funding priorities were health and safety supports for providers, covering the operating costs to implement public health practices. We know this is going to be a huge thing over the next year, given the pandemic and the health guidelines around that. We want to protect the childcare and early learning budget, recognizing that we're going to be in a fiscal deficit. And fortunately, we talked about how we're fortunate that we've had a governor that has 2 governors now that have really prioritized early learning. So it's unlikely we'll get additional funds, but to certainly protect the funds we have and really ensure that they don't get cut, because in the educational continuum, early childhood needs more, it doesn't have a lot of funds. And then really being thoughtful about how we leverage other funding streams to increase the compensation piece and benefits, salary and benefits for early learning workforce. And we talked about benefits being important as well, not just the salary, that there might be opportunities to enhance benefits when maybe we can't get to the salaries right away. And so looking at the whole compensation package. I think that is it. Miriam or Sue, do you have anything you would add that I might have missed?
Great job. Great job. Miriam, anything you want to add?
No, that was a great job, Kali. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Kali. All right. Group 2. Is that your group, David? Or Carrie's? David's group?
David's group. Okay. I am the mandatory reporter.
Congratulations, Anne.
But I will rely upon Eva and Katie and David, and George is not on the phone to correct me when I'm wrong. So we didn't, I won't divide it into the 3 questions because the questions we found kind of overlapped with one another. So I'll just raise the issues that we talked about. I think one of the things was sort of a reiteration that the priorities that exist in Raise Up Oregon and that were developed still stand, and they're still really important priorities. And so we don't want to lose that. We may have to adjust them to accommodate for the times, but we sort of reiterate our faith in those priorities that came up and are so eloquently stated in Raise Up Oregon. Point number 2 is we spent a lot of time talking about childcare, which you might guess given the makeup of our group. But we had a really rich discussion about childcare and about how, starting with the premise that the economics of childcare is completely broken, and this is the perfect time to start over and think about being ambitious about completely restructuring childcare. Because if you just throw some more money to it to keep the doors open for a few more days, that's not going to solve this underlying problem that we know doesn't work. And so the question really is, what can the state do to inspire and promote more flexibility at this moment for really good experimentation around microservices, around shared service, microcenters, shared services, and so on? And about how this could be a really good moment because this is one of the first times that childcare is really being discussed as a legitimate and essential to economic stability and to support the workforce in a new and different way. So in terms of funding, we'd want the funding for pilots, obviously maintaining the focus on quality and equity, because we've learned a lot about how to do both of those things. So not give up either of those 2 things, but focus on a scalable with an economic model that can get the funding out the door fairly quickly. We also talked about the importance of certified in-home childcare providers having the flexibility to provide stable in-home groups and so on for that. But one of the big questions we talked about is that one of the big barriers is liability. And so taking on liability right now is sort of a big question and is worth putting out in front. Can the state do anything to assume the liability as a backstop to this right now? We were talking about how somebody mentioned that insurers are actually even dropping their coverage of communicable diseases right now. Who's going to ensure this? Who's going to cover the liability at this moment? And is there a role for the state to do that? I think then I'll move to another issue that came up for us was about workforce, continued investment in workforce, continued investment in bringing people into the workforce with a focus on equity in that as well. Another issue that we talked about was a concern about child abuse and neglect right now, and the concern about parents who are highly stressed at home with their kids, and about how whatever is happening in terms of what we assume is a stressed family with kids right now is going to have ramifications well into the future. And so as we start to think about planning for the 2021, 22, 23 priorities, there will be some kind of a lasting effect of the fact that parents are stressed at home, not getting the parenting education, the home visiting, et cetera, that they need right now. And that will certainly have, as I think David said, you know, maybe young people are not the primary victims of the virus, but they will be the secondary victims going forward. And then I think the last thing we did talk about is broadband being much more than a general equity issue now. It's a really important issue related to early care, early education, health, and support for behavioral health. So it's a new lens on broadband. What would my fellow working group folks add to that?
Great report. Wow, you covered a lot.
Yeah, I think you got it all in. Good job.
That was really well done.
I was just taking notes. I had brains in my group. I was just the note taker.
All right. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Anne, Eva.
Lessons I'm taking from Anne.
And George. Okay, so the third group with who's reporting out for that? Peter. All right, welcome, Peter.
It was Angie and me for the third group, and we kind of started where Anne just kind of left off, a real focus on family stability and family instability. And even on the system goals, if we were to do anything with the Raise Up Oregon chart, we'd put really system goal number 2, we really think should be where number 1 is now. The first goal should be children are raised in healthy, stable, and attached families, because that's foundational for everything else to happen. And I talked a little bit about the experience that we've had. We've been doing interviews since November, so before COVID hit, of families in our region and systems leaders in our region. And we've done 44 interviews, and we continue to do it even after COVID. The word anxiety has come up in every single interview. In fact, one lactation specialist said that she's been doing her work for 16 years and she's never seen the level of anxiety and depression as she sees right now with moms that she's working with. So we were really focusing, okay, what does it mean to work towards family stability as a policy focus? And we'll talk about workforce later too, because that's also very important. One thing we thought was an equity issue was developing the ways to actually do outreach and actually listen to what families need. One of the people we interviewed was a woman who works in migrant education, and she made the point that not every family wants their 3-year-old or 4-year-old to go to school 5 days a week or any number of days. They might want to keep their kids home because that's how they believe raising their kids works best. So how do we actually do outreach in a way and actually listen and actually respond to the needs that families tell us they have? A quick example has probably been realized in other areas of the state too. Our relief nursery did a survey of people when COVID hit and asked, what do you need? What do you need? And the first thing came back was diapers. We need diapers. So the community was able to organize a diaper drive to get diapers to people. It's just a simple example of that, but really trying to find out ways to how we can do a better job with family engagement. It really came through consistently in our discussion: family stability, family engagement. The priorities we talked about, workforce is still a priority, a huge priority. And like Kali said, the compensation for workforce. finding ways that we can bring a living wage and living benefits to the workforce. It absolutely has to be a priority for us if we're going to have a sustainable system. We don't want early childhood to add to the anxiety that people are feeling and families are feeling. We want actually a stable workforce that's well compensated to help address the needs in the communities. And again, social connections we discussed a lot. How do we not only engage with families in a positive way and a responsive way, but how do we encourage and support social connections? So many groups have talked about, folks in the recovery community have talked about how important it's been to keep peer groups going during the pandemic. The moms group here in Medford, they've found ways to keep their moms peer group communications going. It's been very important for the people involved. So how do we increase the social connection part of social and emotional health for people? And then in terms of funding, our kind of summary was the governor should trust her instincts. We all know that she wants to protect early childhood education services, and we should support her in doing that. We also talked about ERDC, and if there's any way as a priority to expand ERDC in any way and shift it to early learning, that would be something that we'd be interested in. And the last suggestion was find a way to go big by 2023. What is something we can do to impact the workforce by 2023? And suggestion that I have is that we work out a plan to forgive the student loan debt of anyone who graduates with a degree in early childhood education if they commit to working in Oregon in early childhood for 3 to 5 years. So that was a suggestion that we wanted to bring forward. Angie, anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think you pretty much caught it all. Yeah, I don't have anything else in my notes.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Peter. And great example of one possible idea of how to deal with the workforce issue. That could be very exciting. Okay, Harriet and Carrie, you are back. Does that mean you're done?
Yes. So Carrie was going to make it look better. I don't know, Carrie, where you are in the looking better thing. You're on mute.
Did you ask me a question?
I'm almost done. I'm just.
Sue, did everybody report out?
Yes.
Oh, so then you'll see how we did trying to take everybody's things and get them into one document.
Yes, which we greatly appreciate you doing.
Well, you may or may not be so appreciative when you look at it, but hopefully it will resemble what everybody did.
So now what we're going to do is look at this document that Carrie and Harriet have developed based on our input and figure out, so what do we want to talk with Alyssa about when she comes in 20 minutes.
And actually, Sue, we tried to do it. So we took everything that we understood to be like the same idea people had and consolidated them. So it's not organized by group.
Correct.
So potentially you would be able to review the whole thing with her, and hopefully you would be seeing what each group said reflected in our effort to take where there seemed to be repetition, and then where it was just from one, it was, left.
Great. And whether there's any prioritizing that we want to do, Harriet and Carrie, I don't know if you looked at it with that eye either. There's going to be some short-term wins potentially, and then start now, but no, it's a longer-term effort. So just how we want to set that up with Alyssa.
Carrie, it's all up to you now.
Yeah, I just sent it to Sue and Remy.
Okay.
So one of you want to share your screen?
Yeah, Remy, why don't you go ahead and put it up?
Yes, I'm waiting for the email to come in, and here it is. I'll get up in just a second. Okay, here we go, guys.
And I did not completely win the Word document formatting, but hopefully it's readable.
Is that a large enough text for everyone, or should I zoom in a little bit more?
Zoom in more if you can.
But we did smush it all onto one page.
Yes, you did. How about oh, you probably can't unhighlight, can you?
Oh, I can unhighlight.
Oh, even though it's not your document?
Magic.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's, oops. So this is potentially the document that we would present to Alyssa. And I think as we go through this, let's make sure that everything from all three groups is included. And then I'd love any input on, prioritizing among our own priorities. Short-term, long-term, yeah. I think number 6 is, I think, Peter, what you were talking about, that you're saying we'd really better deal with the family stability, or we're not going to get kids ready for kindergarten.
Correct.
Right. Right.
Peter, I agree with that. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what the role of the council is in that.
I think constantly advocating for like workplace policies, like having employment schedules set in advance, and so that employees know when they'll be working and they can plan their family around their work schedule as needed. Any sort of policies that increase wages to living wages, sustainable living wages, any of the efforts that we can support in affordable housing as well. We can be advocates for anything that can bring family stability forward. There's another part of this, though, I think goes along with family engagement. And I don't think, I had a school superintendent, and I quote, said, K-12 sucks at family engagement and parent engagement. And it'd be great if that was one thing, maybe as a council, we could advocate for both early childhood and K-12 to engage in professional development in effective family engagement. So we can create those communication lines where families can talk about what they're going through, what they really need, and our systems can be more responsive.
Peter, this is Harriet. So on your family engagement point, we actually put it under workforce. If you look down where it says funding priorities support the workforce, and there's subclassifications, yep. Basically it says improve skill set of the workforce to engage with families, because that's how what we interpreted from the notes we were given, just so you can see where that is.
Great.
On the document. We separated that from the point around like issues of, normalizing hours and all that kind of stuff you're talking about up there on family stability.
Great, thank you.
This is Angie, also from our group. I'm wondering where being responsive to family needs is as a system, because I mean, these are tiny little letters and I can hardly read it. So it may be there, but I don't see it.
You're right, Angie. I think it's not quite there. It's not the same as the other things that are there on social, emotional, and family stability.
So can we add that then? I guess that would be, I don't know. Is that Remy?
Remy, you would need to add it, I think, because I also think you can give examples under 6 on content priorities. Peter gave some very concrete examples of the kinds of policies. Right, Peter, you were mentioning like predictive schedules and things like that. There's a lot of policy stuff happening around the country there on those things.
And you said housing too as well, I think.
Yeah.
Affordable housing.
Right. And then Angie, your stuff would go under 7. I think, Carrie, is that correct? I don't know. I wasn't in that group, so I'm just trying to listen without full understanding there.
So the responsive to family needs was more about programs and service delivery that's responsive to what families really want and need.
I see.
So the example that Peter used and I had also shared from my experience here is that if I want center-based care for 0 to 3, it has to be 1,380 hours a year. But families might not want their 1 or 2-year-old in a center-based service 5 days a week. They might want to have their child come in 2 days a week where they can get some socialization, but not necessarily being away from home so much. So that's only one example, though. There were other examples that we shared as well, just that we need to not assume what families' needs and wants are, that we need to ask and find out, and then be able to be flexible and responsive to those needs.
So that sounds like a different number, not a sub.
Yes.
Right, because that's obviously very important because it requires a lot of potential redesign. The way I've been hearing people talk about it recently has just been when they're stating additional flexibility that people are exhibiting during COVID, that we need to normalize that as our regular policies and extend some of what people have been experiencing and move that forward more systemically. That's just so how people have talked to me about it.
Thank you.
So does that number 8 say what you were wanting, Angie?
I can't really read it. Let's see.
No. Programs and service delivery that respond to what families want or need.
Yes, that's great. That's exactly what I wanted.
Okay. You know, Peter, the point you were making under the funding priority 3E, I guess it is, about engaging with families. One of the points Kali made, and Kali, you could speak to this, is that the early care and education sector tends to be way better at engaging families than some of the other sector partners.
True.
Just because we have to do that. If you're dealing with a 1-year-old, you need the family to be involved. So we've done it forever. And I'm not sure if that's maybe reflected or implied up in number 1 or 2. Anyway, that was something our group talked about, and Kali really was sort of presenting that idea. So,
hey, this is Eva.
Yeah.
It's so funny, like when, because I didn't even think of this until right now, and I don't know exactly what made, like something specific that we could do is some of the program, like around ERDC, they had the waiving of the copay for the first few months of COVID. And DHS has now started to say, oh, we're going to start rolling back, well, starting Wednesday, I guess, going back to the having, new or reauthorized parents have a copay again. Meanwhile, the people who became, and then the 185% of FPL instead of the 250 for entering. So I think a funding priority could be maintaining the entry level of 250 FPL or below, and maintaining 0 copays for at least the duration of the pandemic, if not a little past, so that we could, ensure that families have access to stable, affordable childcare. And that would help our providers and families a whole lot.
That's great.
Specific thing that's already in place. We have maybe 2 days to get DHS to not roll back that.
Right. Well, that can be on the immediate need list, Eva. Urgent need
I
list.
don't know why I didn't think of say I was thinking these bigger like things, and there's this one simple thing that we could do.
Do you like where I put that and the wording of it in the number 1 sub E down there? Do you see that?
Maintaining lowered zero copays through ERDC through the pandemic.
I think maybe just say maintaining COVID eligibility and zero copays through pandemic. Because I think that at least DHS would and ELD staff would know that what that means.
Got it.
Thank you.
Okay. Other comments on this list to present to Alyssa?
I guess I just have a question. Is this the kind of thing you thought that we were going to develop and that you think is going to resonate with the governor? I mean, have we hit it at the right level, or are we too detailed? Are we too abstract? Are we too all over the place? Is there any sort of more distilling we should do?
Yes, Anne, that's a really insightful question. I think we do need to do some distilling of this, but not before we see Alyssa in 10 minutes. But,
fair enough.
Yeah, but yes, I'll feel better about really looking at it and figuring out, where are the kind of more immediate pieces and what are the longer term, but we want to get started now in the system level. I think we did a great job of having some really system level changes, as well as some immediate, we need some childcare pilots to get off the ground sooner rather than later. Yeah. So I think it's a great kind of compilation and combination of those. But I'm guessing with some time to work on it, we can probably make it a little more, I don't know if it's sequential or have it flow.
Yeah.
Right. And my reaction, having worked with you from the very beginning of even the original brainstorm that created Raise Up Oregon, I feel like you guys honored the vision and purpose of Raise Up Oregon, but in the light of everything that's happening on today, really started to pinpoint where the priority is or the angle of the priority, because we're trying to respond to emergency and respond to the racial inequities that we're seeing. So it doesn't surprise me. So I think there are things in here that after the conversation with Alyssa, you might want to be more specific about the recommendations to the governor's office. And then how would you work with the RUAC committee, or is some of this work required committee work? Like, I think now we could explore with you a couple different angles for some of this work, and they might fall into different buckets. But I think from a content wise, it seems very reasonable, kind of the range. And it was kind of nice to see that there's overlap between all three groups, and yet giving your different expertise and experiences in your communities, there's also unique things from each group. So I think that's also a good thing that shows a good conversation and process.
Yeah, that's a great analysis, I think, of this, Carrie. And it's interesting, workforce is still front and center as it was in January. So there's certainly a consistency with that. And also the whole idea of how do we have state policies that can trickle down to regions and communities, and vice versa. How do we get the community and family voice that comes up into establishing policies, which was our other priority in January. So, excuse me. So those have held constant. And obviously a big addition to this now is holding on to financing, because in January, we thought we were going to have another $200 million. Right. So that's a big change in childcare. which has always been on our list and concerning, but now we're just seeing how incredibly fragile or broken that is. I can't even call it a system, really. It's just not working.
This is Miriam, and I think it's also a great question to ask Alyssa, like about how would be most helpful to kind of distill this in ways for the governor, and also, you know, kind of aligning with what her priorities kind of post-COVID too, or where, I mean, I think making that a discussion as well, or as a question would be good.
Yeah, a really good point, Miriam, because I think we'll start our time with Alyssa out by letting her make any comments she'd like to make as far as sort of setting the scene on where is the governor and where are the conversations that she's involved in now around early learning and the system development. And yes. We can talk about what the council input could be and ask how can we be helpful in advancing this early learning agenda. And we're, as Kali said at the beginning, you know, we're incredibly fortunate to have a governor who has put a stake in the ground on early learning. So we really do need to take advantage in a really positive sense of this moment in time. We'll hope and believe it'll always be that way, but we're not going to assume that. So we need to appreciate the governor.
So I think Alyssa's here.
I am. Hi.
Well, we were just talking about you, Alyssa.
I was gonna say, shh, she just joined.
Let's see. So how about putting this document off to the side so we can see each other again? And we'll start our conversation with Alyssa and then go back to that. In the meantime, if there's any way, Remy, you can make it so that it's actually legible instead of at about a 4-point. So I don't know if that means breaking it into 2, so you'd have the, you know, content priorities on one page and funding on a second page. But if you don't mind seeing if that's possible, one of you, while we welcome Alyssa to our Zoom council meeting.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, we're delighted to have you here. And we've had quite an afternoon, Alyssa, with Kali really setting the stage for a real focus on equity and what we can do in the early childhood realm to fight racism and try to start narrowing these opportunity gaps everywhere. And we know, and you know, that that's has always been a huge focus for early learning in the state. And then we've broken into small groups and then have a document that we can run through with you about some of the priorities that we would suggest. But first, we'd love to give you an opportunity to update us on what's going on in early learning in your life and the governor's life.
Sure. So we're making the official announcement tomorrow, but a lot of you probably have already heard that we're convening a Healthy Early Learners Council. And the governor is pulling this group together with a couple of really key areas of focus. And it's going to be pretty intensive work for the next 2 months and then switch to monthly. But we're looking at the most immediate need of kind of looking at early childhood education guidance. So broadening the frame of the childcare reopening guidance to really be inclusive of EI, ECSE settings, preschool settings, Head Start. And then we're also adding a birth to 8 lens. So looking at some of the early grade implications of reopening and really trying to hold child development and equity at the center of that. The other pieces, and where I think there will be some work that you as the Early Learning Council can really carry forward, is looking at the supports that childcare providers, but even other, school-based and other preschool programs need when it comes to the mental and behavioral health supports that children need in care. We know that we're already seeing new behaviors as kids come back to childcare due to the trauma they've experienced through COVID, whether it's because they've been sheltering in place and isolated from other kids, whether it's because it's impacted their family directly. And we all already know that Black and brown kids, particularly Black and brown boys, are the ones who are disproportionately expelled or suspended from care settings, from kindergarten. And so it's really important that we're bringing this issue to the table and bringing behavioral health experts, community health workers, traditional health workers to the table so that we can talk about how we can support providers and support kids through re-entering in the midst of COVID and the additional traumas they've experienced. The other piece that we're going to look at is the additional supports that childcare providers, particularly home-based providers, might be experiencing with the increased sanitization protocols, and whether we can look at a kind of professional network to support these providers and those services. So those are the three big pieces of work. I think there will be alignment with the Early Learning Council. There's obviously a lot of alignment with this behavioral health work with Raise Up Oregon. And I also think there'll be coordination with the Joint Task Force on Access to Quality, Affordable Childcare when we think about kind of how we're investing in our childcare system and ways that we can start really supporting providers more directly and supporting families. So that's sort of the broad frame. We're working, as always, on an accelerated timeline. So the first meeting is going to happen next week, and they'll be meeting bi-weekly after that. These will be 3-hour meetings. We're hoping to hold them in the evening so that parents and providers in particular are able to join us for these really important conversations. The governor will be chairing this council, and she'll be joining for at least an hour of every meeting, and then I'll be meeting with her in between to keep her updated on this work. We also have an internal team between us, the Health Authority, and the Department of Education to ensure that we're staying aligned across guidances. I've already talked to Chelsea Holcomb, who's Behavioral Health Director with OHA. She's committed to providing whatever supports are needed and review is needed on the OHA system side to support this kind of effort for providers. But this is a racial justice issue. And it's a racial justice issue for our kids, for our parents, and for the providers, the women of color who are caring for these kids. So this is really important work. It's going to be very fast paced as we try to get everybody ready for the fall. This council will then likely meet monthly in potentially more of a reporting space if we see outbreaks in childcare facilities, if we need to readjust what reopening guidance looks like, as we potentially see some efforts to have this sort of health support element embedded into our early learning system. And again, I think that's where, whether it's at the end of this year or the end of the program year in June, I think there's a lot of work that can be handed back to the Early Learning Council to carry forward. And my hope is that this Healthy Early Learners Council can sort of elevate the importance of this work and get it kickstarted, and that we can really turn it back to you all to keep it moving through the REO Act, through these council meetings, and keep that health element really elevated and amplified moving forward.
So Alyssa, I've heard some people just say it's going to be important that this Healthy Early Learners Council be aware of, if not coordinated with, what the K-12 track is doing. So can you address that a little bit of how that'll happen?
Yep. So we're including some early grades educators in this to get their perspective and expertise as we think about kindergarten through third grade. But at the kind of back end on the internal side, we have an internal project team that's comprised of myself, your very own David Mandel, as well as members of the Department of Education and the Oregon Health Authority to make sure that there's no disagreement in the way guidance rolls out. There could very well be implications, since this is a birth through 8 council. There could potentially be implications for the early grades and the K-12 guidance. And this will sort of be an ongoing effort. The other council that you may be aware of is the Healthy Schools Reopening Council that is also starting next week. And their focus is largely on the reopening guidance and the many iterations that the Department of Education is planning to release throughout the summer. So we'll keep those councils apprised of the work each other is doing. Lindsay Capps and I are in constant contact and we'll be coordinating that work as well.
Okay, great. Any questions of Alyssa about that new Healthy Early Learners Council? All right. So Alyssa, any other updates? Miriam gave us a great one last week about getting some of the Student Success Act money approved to be sent out in grants.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the governor's really holding firm on her commitment to early learning and the need, particularly because these program grants are not going to institutions that have the infrastructure and capacity to sort of hold over for a few months, and really the vulnerability of these programs and the need to know if they're expanding and by how much right now. So the governor has really affirmed her commitment to supporting these programs moving forward with sort of a base level floor of expansion that could be increased by the legislature. And Miriam and Colt and Serena and Shandine should all be receiving sort of formal guidance regarding the amounts and the process to move forward later today, if not tomorrow morning.
Great. Well, we certainly want to start our conversation with you and the governor saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah.
And in regard to the council as well, if anybody has suggestions about folks, if you have questions about the positions we have right now, it's looking like it's going to be, right now it's drafted as a 41-member council. I've already gotten suggestions for 2 additional positions we could be adding. So the good news is it's going to be a large table and we want as many perspectives here as possible as we really kind of wrestle with these issues. But feel free to reach out to me directly if you have suggestions or want to talk more about the work of this group.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Any other updates, Alyssa, that you want to present, or shall we start talking about what council's thoughts are?
I think those are the big ones, and happy to answer questions.
Okay. Okay. Are there any questions of Alyssa before we sort of jump into our brainstorming from this afternoon? All right. Okay, so we took, an hour and a half, I think, in small groups and then back as a large total council, Alyssa, talking about, from our perspectives, what do we hope the governor will be prioritizing for early learning? And some of them, as you could guess, and as you'll see, are really short term, a couple that she could do tomorrow, as soon as you meet with her. And then others are probably start short term, but longer term perspective. Because one of the takeaways is we're 100% behind Raise Up Oregon. It still stands. It's a great document. It's exactly what needs to happen to develop the early learning system. And we don't want to backtrack. We're hoping we can at least stay where we are and continue to move forward thanks to the governor's leadership in this arena. But that's one takeaway, is we've got a solid plan.
Yep.
And so it's figuring out now in this at least temporary new world, how do we hold on to the gains that we were anticipating?
Yep.
So Remy, if you will share your screen. And we sort of divided these, Alyssa, into 2 categories. One is to focus on content. Oh, wow, you did blow it up. Thank you.
Is it too big now?
Oh, no, I love it, but we'll just go through it. Nope, it's great. So you'll see, Alyssa, that there are content priorities, and then the next section are funding priorities.
Great.
And we're going to, thank you, Remy. We're going to work on this document and probably do a little bit of restructuring and reorganizing before we actually give it to you and therefore the governor. But this will give you an idea of what the council has talked about today. And council members, I really encourage you to just jump in here because I don't want to do all the talking, and you all have great examples. And Alyssa, I guess the one other sort of overarching comment I would make, and you'll see this goes all through it, is the whole equity and racial justice is sort of front and center in this thinking,
right.
Which I know is true for the governor as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of what number one is, that we know we need to continue to align, and it's community partners. So, you know, before the council also said last January that we wanted that state, local, or state regional connections to be strengthened. And here it's, that's pretty much what that's saying, cross-sector and with equity at the center. And then we're hoping someday the Children's Cabinet may be back or convening again, and that at that level, we'd be able to get the different agency directors to really talk about how do we work together and share some concepts, but also decision-making on equity and how to make the early learning system reflect equity and start as a system really trying to address and remedy a lot of the inequities in that whole system and disparities. Governance, bottom line is we're trying to develop a system, and the belief on the council's part is that we've got to consolidate early learning programs. We need them to implementation of them to be under one umbrella, which should be the early learning division, which we believe should become an early learning department, and be an agency in order to attain and sustain the systems development that we're talking about. And we recognize that won't happen quickly, but we also believe we need to start working toward that and be intentional about that, and really want the governor to understand that we believe the consolidation is a very critical part of having an early learning system that gets the outcomes we want. And as we say, we believe it can be done, the agency development can be budget neutral, but it'll just take some time and lots of conversations. But we'd like to get started on that with the governor. Anyone want to add anything around the governance piece? Okay, I'll keep going then. Financing. So no surprise, we would hope, and we appreciate the governor trying to hold us harmless. We would love to work with her and get any ideas you can offer, Alyssa, of how we can support her in her early learning work. And we know that that's a very high priority for her. So we'd love to know how can we support her in that. And workforce compensation, it comes up in every conversation we have anywhere. And I know it's coming up in the Childcare Task Force as well. And it's sort of one of those foundational pieces, I think, for having a sustainable early care and education system. And it's not just childcare providers who are underpaid for the work they do. It's really systemic. So we want to maintain and continue, excuse me, to increase the diversity of the workforce, and make sure that to the extent possible, we're enhancing our partnerships, both at agency level, public funding level, but also at the private sector level, and working with the business community to have those conversations. And I know Katie Brooks, who I believe is somewhere behind the screen, is doing a lot of work already in Central Oregon in this regard. And Katie, do you want to make any comments about this area?
Sure. I don't want this to be confused with coming up with the different funding stream from the business sector.
No, no.
What we are saying here is that the business community wants to engage in pilot programs, in ways of partnering with providers or the state in whatever new ways of delivering childcare. They're recognizing it as an economic issue and a workforce issue. And they want to be engaged and be part of the solution as kind of a public-private venture. But I can talk to you more, Alyssa, about specifics later if you'd like. But it's essentially to finance ways of putting into place some scalable childcare with the business community as a partner.
That's great. Thank you.
Right. So I think, Remy, what we'll want to do on that 4D is it's to develop financing, but also service delivery is what Katie's also talking about, obviously.
Yes.
So anyway, the whole point that this is going to be a public-private partnership is one that the council's very interested in.
Great.
And then professional learning, we want to reduce barriers so people of color can advance in the profession. We already have a diverse workforce, but we need to continue the effort to make sure that happens, and we support them as they go through the different parts of the profession. Support family stability. Peter, do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Certainly. Alyssa, just everything that we're seeing is that unless we can do a better job of providing ways for families to be stable, we're not going to reach the goals that are in Raise Up Oregon. Yeah. In Southern Oregon, we've done this series of interviews for the past several months, and the level of anxiety, even before COVID hit, has been extreme. The number of people who are just living in fear, they're just not going to be able to provide the basic needs for their families is increasing. Even when the economy was going well, it was still increasing. So everything that we can do, and I know the governor shares these values, but everything we can do to increase wages, working for predictive work schedules with employers so families can plan their lives, and all her efforts in affordable housing, it's also essential to helping stabilize the families so that they can have a chance to have their kids grow up in a way that they can reach kindergarten ready to thrive.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, yes. We all know, especially when you're working with kids from birth to 5, that the family's a critical element for them to get ready for kindergarten.
And so the effort that the early learning led the early learning hubs through in the fall to determine where families were in terms of their economic health and their access to childcare, it's stunning. That data is stunning. You know, the vast majority of parents with children under 5 are close to either between 100 and 200% of the federal poverty level. And it's just stunning to see that many families struggling.
Right. Yeah, and Peter has talked about this before. You know, that's the sector planning that the hubs were asked to do last fall. And Peter, talk just a little bit more about what the findings were, if you would, down in your region.
Certainly. So we were talking about Jackson and Josephine County. We're talking about access problems being far worse than anybody really thought. Some communities would have like one slot for infant care available. But again, the thing that really stood out was, I think it was in Jackson County, it was close to 66% of the families that have children under the age of 5 are either in poverty or right above poverty. And in Josephine County, it was closer to 70%.
Wow. Thank you. Yep.
Yes, well, which will obviously have direct impacts on the kids.
Yep.
And that sort of segues into the social emotional health of children. And you talked about this too, Alyssa, as far as this new Healthy Early Learnings Council. Will be looking at that and trying to figure out some different ways to address that. But we know that that's there and is going to be a real issue. So it's the social emotional health of the kids, it's their parents, it's also the providers who are going to be dealing with these children and their behaviors. So that will be a real area where we'll want to partner with OHA. Yes.
This is Kali. I wanted to mention something here.
Yes.
Alyssa, I think it is, so one thing that I'm a little concerned about is that I'm hearing people talk about the social emotional sort of trauma-informed pieces without the overlay or connection to culturally responsive and culturally specific services. And I mean, I think what this current climate is teaching us, or well, it's not teaching me, but I think it is illuminating for others that some of the various systems that are delivering trauma-informed care are traumatizing to the children and have systemically traumatized the populations that they're seeking to serve. So I do want to make sure that there is specific partnership with different cultural groups, and not the assumption that if we partner with one group that serves communities of color, that therefore that the amalgam is served, that every group has different cultural needs per se. And so it's really important that there is more of a culturally specific bend in understanding different communities. And I don't know, I think to be effective at the social emotional supports, that's important. Granted, I think you can deliver baseline social emotional supports to the mainstream, but there's a level of trauma that will require culturally specific investment in services. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And I don't see it coupled a lot. And like OHA, I think has a journey to get there. So if that's the only partnership, I do have some concerns, and I want to make sure, and I think Patrick would say that too, and they are reaching out to do more partnership with communities across the state. But I don't know. I just want to ensure that there's more than just that.
Yes, thank you. No, that's perfect. And in terms of the positions, we're trying to get actual providers of services. So not get the program directors or even the program managers, but the community health workers, the traditional health workers that are going into communities, the behavioral health specialists who are actually meeting with kids and families. And not talking about theory, but talking about what they see. And so we definitely want to have that strong culture responsive lens. I think your point is very well taken, though. While it's 41-ish members, each of those is 2 or 3 positions. And so how do we really have other tables and other conversations going? We can't get everybody into that table, but that doesn't mean the conversation has to stop there. So I appreciate you raising that.
And it's a really good point. And Remy, once again, I think on number 7, just before we forget it, we ought to add something about that are with a culturally specific focus or something to make sure we've got the cultural aspects of that.
And so the screen that you're viewing is my PDF, and I'm making these notes in my Word on my other screen. So just so you know. Cool.
Okay. Thanks, Remy. Any other comments on this area of family stability, social emotional health? The number 8 is sort of what Peter was talking about. Let's talk to families, engage with them, and then respond to what we hear from them. So once again, that family engagement and parent voice is just critical for the work we're doing.
If I can just say one other thing here. I mean, I think similarly, the partnership piece becomes important. One of the things that came out of this pandemic and conversations folks from the Black community have with OHA is that OHA and even the county in reaching out, and this is in the metro region, doesn't have their own relationship with families. Government often doesn't. And so how are government entities partnering with community-based providers and organizations to get the connection with family? That's really critical. And it was a little delayed on the pandemic response, and really using those agencies and organizations that have relationship with families to get PPE equipment, testing, all these things. And I want to make sure that that is, I think, outlined and underscored in the process. I think ELD has done this well in really understanding that providers bring voice for community, and not the expectation that they alone will reach out to families. But I don't know that that is true across agencies that are touching the lives of young children. So I think calling it out is very important.
Yes, thank you, Kali. Great point. And I think what you're talking about is one of the really exciting parts about the new equity fund that has been developed and is being funded now with some of the nonprofits that applied for those funds. So I think the ELD will continue to be sort of a leader in that whole realm. And Remy, let's make a note and make sure we incorporate that idea too. So I think is that it, Remy? Is there a number 9 or not? No. Okay. So we'll move on to funding priorities, even though we've already touched on some of this, Alyssa, but obviously childcare priorities are a very big concern, big topic. And probably none of these will be a surprise to you to see these. The D, as far as the liability issues are concerned, Anne, do you want to talk about that? I think that came out of the group you reported on, right?
Can you hear me? Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yes, now we can.
I'd be happy to, but I would like to invite Katie to go first, because she's really thought about this more than I have. Katie, if you're still there, would you be willing to jump in? Otherwise, you've got a 4-second reporting on this.
So specifically, what are you wanting me to cover?
Oh, just sort of why liability is on our list for the governor.
Right, in regards to, well, a lot to talk about, but so specifically, what I was referring to with liability is the ability to pilot new programs. For example, if the state ever took on a pilot program such as a contracting position or a micro center where one person or a group of providers that we have a lot of confidence in staff and operate multiple micro centers in existing facilities. That's essentially the model. If we did that, and even any other type of pilot, there are 2 things. The first 2 things out of anybody's mouth that want to have childcare on the premises is we don't want to operate it, and who has liability for the operations. So if you're going to try anything new, if you are going to build anything scalable, expandable, implementable in many different settings that you can deploy across the state, this issue of liability is going to come up a lot. And if there was some role the state could play in backing it up, even in second positions, something that would take that and put it farther down on the list, it would be a big help. Especially if you want to deploy something over and outside of traditional types of centers that we've seen and we know economically don't work anymore. Does that help?
Yeah.
I was
That's
going to a comparison I've heard been made on this is like with the federally qualified health centers, that if a health center meets certain requirements, the federal government backs them on their liability. Could the state do the same thing? If a childcare center met certain requirements, could the state take on the liability?
That's great. That's really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Great example. Thank you, Katie and Peter. So with the on B, the innovative models of funding, that's an area where, as I'm sure you know, we're hoping to partner with philanthropy. So it's another example of where the public-private sectors can really work together. And I think that's another piece, just as we're talking about getting the business community to help us figure out what are some childcare options to look at. Philanthropy is just a whole nother piece of that private sector that I think there are all sorts of possibilities for partnering with them. So we're very excited about that as well. And I know the governor is aware of some of those efforts. Mm-hmm. And then E in that list is one of those ones that is very specific and could be done tomorrow. So we wanted to make sure we gave you the broad, 3-year view, Alyssa, as well as something that could happen immediately. And
I think they could or should.
Both. As you know, that's for ERDC, those are just really big issues that somehow happened quickly for when COVID hit. So we're assuming they could happen quickly since COVID is still here.
Yep, thank you. And Miriam and I had a call with DHS earlier today, and they're trying to get us some answers on turnaround. I think the new element in this is the integrated eligibility system that's launching Wednesday. And we're hoping that creates more flexibility, but I think that's where some of the outstanding questions are. But thank you. And we're going to continue to have these conversations to figure out what the system abilities are, the budget impacts are, and how we can try to keep as many of these policies in place through the pandemic.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Yeah, Eva.
Thanks for that. And I can't think of a way to ask this and that doesn't come out sounding snarky. So forgive me, because I mean it in sincerity. When does the one eligibility system become not the thing that is the barrier? Because for 2 years now, a lot of our policy discussions about making things easier to access for parents and providers and reduce the stress has been the stressor, and it's so frustrating. And one eligibility was supposed to be the saving grace for so many areas.
Yeah, and I think who we spoke with, she's not on the systems team, so she couldn't speak kind of quickly off the top of her head to timing the piece she flagged. And I think this has been raised at the Children's Cabinet as well, as it's one eligibility because there's multiple programs that it serves, and ERDC is one of the smaller programs that's in that. And so when you start to prioritize policy changes, when they have to prioritize implementation, it sounds like ERDC doesn't necessarily rise to the top. And I think that's an area where our office can provide some support. I think now that there's clarity around policy decisions between ELD and DHS, there can be some clearer expectations, and hopefully over the next couple of months we start to have a better understanding of what's feasible and where we need to push on things a little bit harder to get everybody to understand the urgency and provide the support that DHS might need to make it happen.
And I would just add that for the ELD, it's a very high priority.
Mm-hmm.
To
yes.
Provide the contrast.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for that information, Alyssa. So number 2, no surprise, and we know this is really just restating what the governor has said, which is to try to hold on to early learning funding, both from the Student Success Act, but also from general fund. So we would love to hear at the end of this, Alyssa, how we can partner with you and the governor in accomplishing some of these pieces. Workforce, which we've already talked about somewhat, but making sure we're looking at all possible funding streams for compensation of our early care and education workforce, both salary and benefits. And then we know professional development continues to be an important part of this, building the system and getting the outcomes that we want. We want to make sure there's training with an anti-racism focus. And it's interesting that we talked about that as really cross-sector training. That's not just ELD, but we really are hoping to have all sectors prioritize that kind of training. And from the K-12 system, it was talked about making sure it's school boards as well as all the staff. So it's really governance as well as the people who are implementing this. And then Peter, do you want to just mention this one?
Just trying to think of something that could raise the awareness of the vital need for people working in early childhood, and perhaps develop a loan forgiveness, a student loan forgiveness program if graduates with early child degrees commit to working in Oregon for 3 to 5 years.
That's great. Thank
you. Very exciting idea. And then how do we take advantage of, maybe is the way to look at that, what COVID has done as far as all of this virtual communicating goes. So might as well see if we can, find something positive out of this crisis. And trying to identify where there are scalable pilot programs. There are, some that obviously are existing, whether it's parenting, home visiting. I think relief nurseries were also mentioned. So we know we've got some programs out there that are successful and make the impact we want, but they're way underfunded and serving a small percentage of families. So once again, a funding issue, but we don't have to create something new to be able to increase our impact. And then, as I said at the beginning, some of these can be done tomorrow and others will take a little longer than that.
This is great.
We are here to work with you, Alyssa, and to support you and to support the governor. We truly appreciate her leadership and yours.
Yes, no, this is wonderful. And I look forward to kind of seeing the final version of this, and we'll take it forward. We have a lot of work happening internally as well to really hold anti-racism and racial justice at the center. So I think this is really timely, and there's some big opportunity to make bold moves in the work and be in better service of our kids and families.
Awesome. So any ways that let's see, we've got, we do have a little bit of time left. So council members, feel free to throw in other comments. And Alyssa, I think we really would appreciate any thoughts you might have of how we can work with the governor and support her agenda and her work in this area.
Yeah, no, this I think is a really great start. I think to your point of some of this can be tomorrow, some of this is down the way. I think being able to kind of bucket them into those timeline periods will be really helpful as we think about getting ready to develop the governor's recommended budget. I think we have to do that in the next 150 days. And I think this will be a really critical element as we start those conversations. So thinking about what you know, what's feasible for the next biennium, what do we want, what stakes do we want to put into the ground now, and what are the longer term visions that we want to work on that the council can carry forward. That will be really helpful. I think similarly having, as you think about those sort of tomorrow changes, those immediate things that need to happen, really just having kind of a tight vision and common message that you can be sharing and really promoting in your spaces as early learning council members is really important. Working with the legislature, and I think folks, a silver lining of this pandemic is that early learning and childcare is on everybody's radar, and a lot of folks who maybe didn't think this was an important space are recognizing this, even if it's just as an economic support, even if they aren't quite there yet as the importance in child development and return on investment, they can at least understand the economic impacts of not having a stable system. So I think being able to capitalize on that and be able to have to cite some of the gaps that we know are there and how some of your proposed priorities really start to address those in a way that's really, that can focus both on the economic stability ends of things, as well as the importance of child development and our long-term return on investment and what we know about interrupting trauma and supporting kids and families, and how really early learning is kind of the bedrock there. So I think those would all be really helpful as we talk about work over the next few months as we get ready for January and the next full session.
Okay. Yes, and we will look forward to being supportive and as involved as you want us to be as we approach different special.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Okay, we'll let Remy take care of that. Council members, and other comments, other input you'd like to give Alyssa for whenever she sees the governor again? Or pieces of this agenda that you'd like to emphasize?
Yeah, this is Kali. I would just say, Alyssa, I think the interesting thing that I find about early childhood space is that it's a system that is education, and rightfully so. I think the governor has focused on it as a education, as part of her sort of education agenda, but it's also businesses. We're talking about small businesses, and there hasn't been in the economic development recovery efforts. I think the governor has done a good job. I think nationally it could be better, but looking at these, looking at the providers as small minority-owned businesses that need support and intervention from an economic development standpoint. And I think, unlike the K-12 system, because it's a private system like that, but it's not, I don't know, as lucrative as other businesses. I think they get overlooked as small business owners, and the needs of any small business owner, the fact that they're mostly minority and women-owned businesses, I think there should be prioritization of them with different economic development funds. And I also think there are workforce issues when it comes to pay and what I would say sort of pay equity. I think it's a huge equity issue that you've got a workforce that is, again, mostly female, mostly people of color predominantly, and they are paid not even living wages. And so I think sometimes I wonder if, and this is not the governor's issue, I just, in society, because it's education, it masks sort of the business economic development workforce component of early childhood that is really important from an equity lens. And so to the degree that the governor can give more voice and visibility to that, I know that the council, this is important to the council, as you know, Chair Miller already highlighted. But I think the governor's voice on this is very important, and continuously bringing it up from those frames and at those tables.
Yep. Nope, that's great. Thank you. Absolutely.
Other comments from council members? a great opportunity to capture the governor's early childhood primary advisor with us. We're so lucky to have you in that position, Alyssa, because you obviously know the early learning division inside and out. So we couldn't have a better liaison to the governor. We're very fortunate.
Thank you.
Very fortunate. So Kali, can I put you on the spot? Because we have a couple more minutes with Alyssa, but then if we have no other input, we'll move on. But would you just share with Alyssa, Kali, some of your opening comments about you being an optimist and how lucky we are to be in these positions at this time? Sorry, I didn't warn you that I was going to ask for this, but I think it'd be very inspiring, not only for Alyssa in the work she's doing, but also for the governor, because I think that's the vision, that's the legacy the governor also wants to leave.
Yeah, so I don't have the talking points. I actually did type up talking points. I don't have them in front of me right this moment, but I think the gist of it was, I'm just going to speak off the cuff. You know, I think there is a unique opportunity because we are literally shaping the lives of the future. I think that I was saying that we are privileged as people in the early learning space, that the moment the child enters the world, like, we get to shape and impact their lives. And when you look at anti-racist work, I shared a little bit, children notice difference at 5 or 6 months old. So this opportunity to shape a new narrative for the future really lies in what we do with our youngest children and with our babies and with their mamas, well, families, but when I'm thinking maternal child health there as well. And so I think that if we're serious about changing society, we have to be serious about supporting children in the early years and doing so in a way that illuminates practices and focuses on policies that reinforce the humanization of every person and developing empathy. Like, empathy is a skill. It's not just this innate trait, and empathy can ebb and flow. We develop muscles in our brains around empathy based on what we learn. And so this idea of being connected, there's a natural inclination to be connected with the group that you're in, but we can supersede that if we are intentional. And that all that has to do with education, child rearing, care for children. And so that's an enormous opportunity, as I see it, to really make an indelible imprint on our future. And I think it's overlooked. And I think that is where the hope lies. And sometimes, there's always dynamics in society and within families that might complicate things. But then again, that's where any childcare provider is in a unique situation to disrupt what might be happening in society and what might be happening that maybe is toxic in a family, to provide, children so many different tools and skills to appreciate difference, to honor diversity of cultures and backgrounds and perspectives, to have empathy for those who are different than them, to have curiosity in a healthy way about that difference, and to learn strength and resiliency through challenging times and not trauma. And that's important, I think, because when we are in a place of trauma, we operate in ways that are detrimental. And when we are operating out of resiliency and the tough times, the brain maps it either as trauma or resiliency, and the positive attributes are associated when we map it with resiliency. And so more benefit comes to society when we help children cope. And that's the social emotional stuff that we've discussed. So I just see us, having these conversations now in society about racism. It's unfortunate that we didn't focus on this at earlier ages. That can mitigate a lot of the issues that we have in society now. And I think that's the opportunity that lies within all of our hands to change that. And yeah, I think that's the gist of it. I don't know. Is there anything that I missed that you want me to?
No,
okay.
That was it. I think having some optimism and looking for those opportunities right now is a really important piece of what we're trying to represent and focus on. So,
if I could say one more thing, this is the thing that I think is so great about Ibram Kendi's work. I talked about that book. He talks about racism and being a racist as a verb, not a pejorative. And I think in our society, there's such like a visceral reaction to the word racist. And if we change the frame to an active thing that everybody can do, no matter what color you are, it really changes the frame of impact, in my opinion. And so this idea of like, we all can actively work against racism or be racist no matter who we are, I think that's powerful. So I think that's important.
Thank you, Kali. I really appreciate that. And I wrote down a couple of your terms because I think, as I mentioned, this is becoming clearer to folks, but I think your point, I mean, the opportunity, you said the indelible imprint on our future. And I think that's right. And I think this is probably one of the few opportunities we're going to get to really be able to elevate the importance of this space in the next few years, and we can't miss it. So I really appreciate you putting a finer point on that.
Yeah. Okay, anything else from Alyssa or for Alyssa? Okay, if not, thank you, Alyssa, very much for being with us today, but also for all of the work in this arena.
Yes, thank you all. And again, send me your thoughts, questions, any questions about this new council, and good luck. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, council, wow, we've gotten a lot done today. So rule adoption is last but certainly not least, right, Amy?
That's right.
We're to the highlight of the agenda.
Yes, the glamour item. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Amy Joyce. I'm the Director of the Office of Childcare, here today on what I would consider a technical change to a set of our rules. By way of background, our investigations has partnered with DHS, Child and Protective Services, over about the last year in a pilot program to do tandem investigations where a child abuse investigation is happening at a child care facility. That pilot has been very successful, and therefore we went statewide with that so we can do better investigations to better protect children. DHS changed which office will do those investigations, changed it from child welfare over to what is called, the acronym is OTIS. It's Office of Training and Investigative Specialists. So now we partner with our OTIS partners at DHS to do these tandem investigations. We needed therefore to update the rules to reflect that change so that it's referencing the correct office of DHS. And actually we went to a more generic term so that even if the office changes again, it's really capturing the work that's done versus the office where it sits. So that's really all that's happening in this rule, but to be legally compliant, we were advised we needed to update this rule. So I'd be happy to take any questions on that.
Okay, any questions, council member? I'm sure you've read all 10 pages of this rule. Looking for just the cross outs. If there are no questions, then we have, if I can find my action form, on our council action request form that was in our agenda, there is an action requested, which I'll just read into the record. This would be the motion: amend the administrative rules to update the definition of child abuse and neglect to delete reference to the incorrect office within DHS, with which the Office of Childcare conducts tandem investigations into potential regulatory violations arising from allegations of child abuse. Will one of you please make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Peter. Is there a second for that?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Anne. Any discussion of the motion? If not, those in favor, please raise your hand if you're still on the video. Aye.
Ali says aye.
Elise, aye. Kate, aye.
Katie says aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Phew, Amy, that was close. Thank you, Amy. We appreciate that. I think Remy, somebody mentioned earlier in this meeting, the good news is that Miriam now has permission to release some of the funding so that we can fund the grants some of the grants that were proposed and submitted to the ELD back in April or May, June, sometime recently. And in the chat box are the amounts for each of the programs for funding. And we may have some appeals for some of the funding decisions, and we would know that by the end of July. So the tentative date, I think that someone said was that it would be July 30th. Is that right?
I think we're looking at sometime the week of the 27th through the 31st.
Okay. Okay, so somehow I've got the 30th on my calendar, but
okay,
we won't know if we even need that meeting until we know if we have any appeals. So it's sort of, and I know it's the middle of the summer, but it'll sort of be one of those, it'll probably only be a short meeting. Hopefully there won't be any, but not many. So sometime on the 30th, we may need to come together to hear some appeals. But
I'm going to be on vacation that week, and I don't know if I'll have self-service. I'll be camping. So it's hard to say. If I do have service, I'll be happy to join a short meeting, but I'm not sure if there's service there.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Angie.
Sure. Could I ask Miriam a really quick question? Thank you for the amounts, Miriam. I'm curious if you could give us an estimate, like so for the equity fund, 8 million out of 10 was a pretty high percentage, but for the other ones, do we get about half the funding? Do we get more than half the funding? I'm just wondering, are we looking at half the grants that we thought we were going to award or less?
Yeah, so I think the OPK, just sort of working off memory here,
Yeah,
OPK, Early Head Start, and Equity Fund, we're the largest outside of EI, ECSC, we're all, kind of the largest investments in the early learning account. So those saw the kind of decreases, about like Equity Fund or a bit more in OPK, Early Head Start. I'm sorry, Preschool Promise as well also saw a significant, a sizable reduction. I'm not going to say it's not, insignificant, anywhere between several hundred slots, right, for each of these programs. As well, some of the, as a reminder, some of the resources in the early learning account that the legislature budgeted for professional learning, preschool capacity, including a scholarship program to be co-administered, that the HEC was going to administer for a new scholarship program for early childhood educators. Operations, at ELD and which was a kind of a smaller amount, money for the hubs, for the community planning and coordinated enrollment. All of those have seen reductions as well. So I think it's both in services and infrastructure. I would say the smaller investments in the account, Relief Nurseries, Healthy Families Oregon, and Parenting Education are intact, close to the budgeted amount. And so I think it's important to remember this is, and the governor's direction is our go forward strategy for, what, we're in this moment where we need, we don't have kind of direction, and Colt spoke to this a bit. We need the legislature to kind of come in and do their work to help reset the state budget, accounting for the impact that COVID has had on state revenues. So we know we're going to have less revenue. The full picture of where our budgets are going to land for the second year of the biennium, is still unknown. We know that the legislature met last week. They didn't deal with budgetary issues. And so I think it was really important for the governor to give us this direction on being able to move forward with, being able to issue intent to award notices for most of the funding in the Student Success Act early learning account. I would say that I don't know the timing of this, but we do hear that the legislature will come in at some point in another special session to look at the impact of COVID on revenue and the state budget. And so I'm saying the portion of the funds is the, this week's strategy. We don't know how that's going to settle. And I think when you see our announcements this week of the grant award, we'll be able to show in each of these areas where we're funding at the amount we received approval for, and then the slots or grantees that we would fund if there were more available resources for, in the early learning account. But I think at this point, that's really going to take, the legislature kind of coming back in and dealing with revenue. I think I also want to just remind the council that we're really talking about the CAT. So when we're talking about the early learning account investments, as a reminder as well, we have communicated to partners previously about some allotment cut exercises to our general fund investments. And we've communicated that to all of you. To this point, we have not been directed to make any general fund reductions. But, I think as well, when the legislature does, come back and work on budget issues, I think that is still a possibility, is to not, is to see some potential cuts to general fund investments and state agency budgets. So, none of those exercises that we did is anything that we're implementing right now. Our letter to partners said, if you have a 2-year contract with the division, you should, proceed, right, until we advise otherwise. But it is still somewhat, of a risk, because we don't know what will also happen with general funds. So just want to remind you of that. I think your voice and your advocacy perspective, both as I think was talked about today on, protecting all early learning investments across the, the CAT and the general fund investments, is still really important as we see what the outcome is ultimately, and impact of state agency budgets the second year of the biennium.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Miriam. Okay, any other comments, questions? Well, nice work, council members. I think we got a lot done today. It's interesting that we're certainly maintaining a focus on the 2 priorities we established 6 months ago, workforce and state local connections. And we've added several to those, with childcare being a really primary focus, and all of this with equity as sort of the foundation that goes through and permeates all of it. We will be working on that document to get it prepared and sent over to the governor through Alyssa. And I think we can all feel really good about the advice we're providing the governor. And we will welcome hearing back from her, I'm sure, on what her budget for 21-23 is going to look like, and also how we can support her in this early learning system development. So with that, no other comments. We are adjourned, and thank you all very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.